Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching third and final part of What If Broken Naruto was trained by Kyuubi. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto grinned as his eyes opened. He reached over and gave Cassie a head pat. When Cassie became aware that he was awake, he allowed Naruto to take his hand away from the fox's mouth. Naruto was not in a rush, so he got up and brushed himself off. At some point during his meditation, he noticed that Kakashi had returned. The fox nodded and took a seat by the balcony, watching through the bars. "Stay here, Cassie, just watch." Naruto approached the balcony's edge and leapt to the arena's edge, making his way toward the center. Kiba yelled at him, "What were you doing, Naruto? I thought I saw you taking a nap. You really that exhausted?" Kiba asked in a tone that suggested he didn't give a damn. Naruto simply grinned. "If you ask me, you're the one that could do with some beauty sleep, dog face," Naruto responded. "Get your mutt out of the ring. This is no place for pets." Kiba glanced up at the fox observing them and said, "He isn't my pet, he's my partner. Get your new friend down here. If he knows anything, he might actually make this fight interesting." "No," was said, followed by a little yawn. Naruto grinned and said, "I can take care of you myself, both of you as well for that matter." "Enough," declared the referee. They both nodded in agreement. "If you are both ready, then, begin." Without wasting any time, Kiba squatted down and began a technique. Shikaku no Jutsu, quadruped technique. Kiba quickly dropped to his knees. He became even more bestial than he was before. His movements, his fangs, his claws. He vanished and charged Naruto a moment later. Naruto was struck squarely in the middle of his breastplate by the clawed blow, and the force of it caused him to skid back a few feet. Well, if it had connected, that's what would have occurred. Rather, the blow went unnoticed because Naruto grabbed Kiba's wrist at the last second and pulled it to the side. Too slow, Kiba heard only before Naruto's right shoe's metal capped toe kicked him in the stomach. Naruto felt a little taken aback. The feel of Kiba's jacket was similar to that of his first Kibo jacket. The armor stitched into the coat made the kick less powerful than it would have been otherwise. Kiba bounced back fast. He leapt back to his dog, Akamaru, after releasing Naruto's grip. Kiba retrieved something from his pocket, which was concealed in a clenched fist, and said, "So, it looks like you picked up some new tricks." He gave Akamaru a nod, and the two of them charged Naruto, saying, "Let's see you try 2-on-1." Kiba hurled a smoke bomb at Naruto's feet as they were barely in front of him. Naruto was blinded when it exploded. Kiba would arrive and launch an attack before Naruto had a chance to react to the explosion. In order to find his opponent, he attempted to flee the smoke. However, that was Akamaru's signal to enter the conflict. The little dog lunged at Naruto as soon as he emerged from the smoke, his jaws agape, prepared to bite the startled boy. By raising his arm to shield his face, Naruto ultimately prevented himself from suffering any harm. The dog held on despite only being able to scratch the armor with his teeth after biting the armored forearm bracers. Naruto yelled, "Get off, you stupid dog," and whipped out his arm. Akamaru lost his grip and was hurled into a wall, far from Naruto. As Kiba yelled, "Akamaru is no stupid dog," Naruto's final remark seemed to have touched a nerve. Kiba extracted a small object from his equipment pouch. He flicked a pill to his dog in one motion. Akamaru chomped down after catching it in his mouth. His fur instantly turned red instead of tan, and he leapt onto Kiba's back. Kiba yelled, "No more playing around," as he used the body altering method on himself once more. Akamaru barked and transformed into a more human-like form as he grew more beast-like. Apart from their facial expressions, they actually had the same appearance. Kiba was smiling because he thought he would win. Akamaru was largely expressionless and didn't appear accustomed to seeing a human face. Akamaru and Kiba hurried Naruto together. It was time to battle numbers with higher numbers, Naruto decided. After a few hand seals and a chakra explosion. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Technique. Suddenly, Naruto was joined by 4 people rather than just one. They faced off against Akamaru and Kiba, who were surprised by how fast he applied the technique. Kiba, however, was not yet defeated. Kiba yelled, "Now, Akamaru," and spun around as he threw himself forward. He was imitated by Akamaru. Gatuga, Double Piercing Fang. The real Naruto was thrown back against a wall, and the 3 Naruto clones were destroyed due to their lack of preparation. As one of the 2 spinning enemies charged at him, Naruto struggled to figure out how to defeat it. When inspiration struck, he leapt aside. He began avoiding the attacks by performing hand seals. Naruto was interrupted twice and had to restart, but he was successful the third time. He called out his own surprise tactic, which he had never employed in combat and had not used in a long time. High note Inju. Fire ribbons. He ducked a double attack from both spinning enemies, and 2 ribbons of fire shot out of his hands. He dropped one end of each of the loose ribbons into the spinning forms. Suddenly the ribbons were wrapped around Akamaru and Kiba. They both ceased spinning, and it was clear why: they were burning. Kiba swatted at himself in an effort to put out the fire that was burning in his coat, pants, and even his hair. It was worse for Akamaru. He had changed back into a dog to get away from the fire when it had first touched him, but he had only been able to rub his fur up against the ribbons. Consequently, his fur had caught fire. To put it out, he rolled on the ground, but it was clear that he would not be able to get away without getting severely burned. After removing his jacket and hurried to Akamaru's side to assess the extent of the injuries, Kiba was able to put out his hair and pants. Naruto said, "Give up, Kiba," while glancing down at his classmate who was kneeling over the wounded dog. "You can get him treatment that way." Kiba gave Naruto a stern look, but she could also see the sadness on his face. Naruto took a step back. That irate look brought back a lot of the glares he had encountered from people as he strolled around Konoha. Kiba's expression softened before Naruto dared to approach. Kiba muttered, "I give up," and then repeated it more loudly. "I give up, please, a medic for Akamaru." Naruto and Kiba were already being checked by medic ninja. A nin approached Akamaru and began tending to the burns. Kiba demanded to accompany the medic as he began to remove Akamaru. A reluctant medic approached Naruto, but he dismissed her and continued on toward the stairs. Nobody he didn't trust could ever get close to him. He became aware that everyone was staring at him when he arrived at the observation balcony. He felt extremely uneasy about it. Naruto avoided making eye contact with anyone and instead looked down. Sakura was in awe. As usual, Naruto won a battle that no one had predicted he would win by using yet another unexpected technique. She was astonished by more than just Naruto, though. The fox Naruto had brought along had sat and observed through the banister's bars during the match, barely moving at all. It only occasionally twitched its tail and never made any noise. After Naruto had returned to the balcony and the battle was over, the fox rose and approached him, rubbing against his legs until he reached down and scratched the fox's ears. Having Cassie there to reassure him and let him know he wasn't alone made Naruto happy. He turned away from the fox to see Sakura standing there. He noticed a rather unflattering expression on her face. He was hurt by the look she gave him, which made it clear that she still didn't trust him. Then he saw a figure approaching him. "He is stronger than people give him credit for," Hinata recalled her father telling her that day so long ago as she watched Naruto during the battle. "He will become very well known in the future." At this point, she thought she understood what her father had been discussing. It wasn't any easier for her to approach this boy because her father had, in a sense, endorsed him. In her hands, she extended a tiny container while bowing. She whispered, "Oh, ointment, for your bruises." She looked up to see Naruto observing her, but nothing happened. Now it was her turn to be extremely uneasy. The boy examined her silently, and she flushed. Hinata's teacher, Kurenai, was on the verge of ordering Naruto to take the ointment container, but she decided against it. Reaching out, Naruto carefully took it in one hand. Naruto said, "Thank you," even though he knew he didn't need it. The bruises would heal in a few minutes. However, he was aware that concealing his healing ability was crucial. After bowing, Hinata rushed to give Kiba more of her ointment. Naruto went to sit down where he had been prior to the match. He let Cassie sniff the container after opening it. Although it sneezed, the fox appeared to be signaling that everything was safe and okay. Starting with some of the more severe bruises, Naruto applied it. As he rubbed the lotion into his aches, he was a little taken aback when they went away. This was excellent material. Naruto glanced up at the board with the names written on it as the next names were called out. Hyuga, Hinata and Neji were there. Both Kibo and Kido had told Naruto a lot about the Hyuga's fighting style. He was informed that it was among the most potent fighting techniques in Leaf. This would be the ideal opportunity to witness it in action. The fox said, "Cassie," as it eyed him. The fox sat down beside Naruto and peered out between the bars, adopting a stance similar to the one he had used to watch Naruto's fight. "Watch them, this should be interesting." Neji, the older of the two, attempted to intimidate Hinata just before the referee began the fight. It appeared to have caused her a lot of pain as Naruto watched him attack her for being unfit for the main house. He then attacked her physical inadequacies and her willingness to actually fight him, which nearly broke her to the point of surrendering right then. Naruto merely observed. He remained silent until Neji launched his last verbal assault. He said that Hinata's future was predetermined and chastised her for not being able to use the family bloodline. Naruto was triggered by his declaration that fate was unchangeable. One of the railing's supports began to give way under the weight of Naruto's fist as he clenched at them. He exclaimed, "That is a load of shit," far louder than he had meant to. "There is no set future, there is no destiny and no fate. We make our own paths through life with the power that we have. Hinata has the same right to victory that you have, but you're not going to see that if you keep jabbering on," Naruto said to Hinata. "Show him, Hinata. Prove to him that you have the power in you to change the future he believes so strongly in." Hinata noticed that Naruto's eyes were filled with rage at Neji. They inspired her to take action in addition to his words. Her determination solidified, and she assumed a low fighting stance, arms spread wide, her eyes and blood limit fixed intently on Neji with all the vigor she could muster. Grinning, Naruto let go of the supports he had been holding for death. Sakura gave Naruto a look. Why had Naruto exploded like that, she wondered. Did he harbor resentment toward Neji? Or perhaps the other boy had said something? However, Kakashi was aware of the additional reactions that Naruto had displayed when he became enraged. For the briefest of moments, his ears had become more pointed and the tips of his hair had turned red. Was he more affected by the fox than he realized? If anger was the cause of the change, he would need to discuss this with Naruto when they had some free time. The referee gave the all clear to begin the fight down on the arena floor. It was amazing to watch the first moves. Both of these individuals had been training since they were very young. They had thoroughly researched their style long before they planned to enroll in the academy. As a result, they seemed to have almost equal skill. Each of them blocked or deflected a barrage of blows. Down on the floor, two white cranes seemed to be fighting and dancing together. However, there was a lot of animosity between the two. Anger drove Neji to strike out at Hinata. Because he made no effort to hold back, his blows were marginally more devastating than hers. To show herself and others that she was not worthless, Hinata battled her cousin. However, she actually didn't want to harm him, so she didn't strike him too hard. She made the decision to simply lose, which put Neji ahead of her. All of the onlookers were shocked by the battle's conclusion. Hinata briefly seemed to have gotten past Neji's defenses and delivered a strong blow that would have leveled the playing field with her cousin. However, just as Neji's defenses were lowered, he struck Hinata's body's key pressure points with both hands. The first area of pressure was close to her shoulder on the inside of her arm. It stopped her arm's movement and the flow of chakra down it, which was essential to their fighting style. The second point of pressure was genuinely menacing. His right hand's two fingers gave her a sharp blow to the heart just below her collarbone. Neither of them moved from their positions. Hinata made an effort to stay upright. However, she was aware of the harm to her body. Blood tasted metallic as it rose up her throat and into her mouth. She collapsed to her knees a moment later, and blood was thrown up all over the arena floor. With the assurance that the altercation was over, Neji turned away from her and began to leave. Hinata looked up at the one person who had given her the courage to keep fighting from where she was on the ground. She noticed Naruto staring at her. When he nodded to her, she was relieved. He mouthed to her, "You did well." She grinned and allowed the medic ninja to take her away for immediate critical care without a fight. In private, Naruto vowed to hold Neji accountable for those words that had so thoroughly irritated him. Winner, Neji. The referee's job included making the announcement, even though it was totally superfluous. Only 4 individuals remained to compete for the 2 tournament spots. The only 2 left for Leaf were Choji and Rock Lee. Dosu from Sound eagerly awaited his turn. Then there was the sand. Gaara. When Naruto turned to look at Gaara, he was no longer there. Wondering where the ninja could have gotten to, he glanced around. A moment later, to his surprise, he noticed that Gaara had gone down to the central arena and was impatiently waiting for his opponent to descend and get ready for combat. Naruto cursed as he turned to face the screen that showed the names. Lee Rock. In order to avoid worrying about the possible outcomes, Naruto had hoped that Dosu would be facing Gaara. Or Choji, who he was aware would surrender rather than engage in combat with someone as intimidating as Gaara. However, it turned out to be Rock Lee, and Naruto was aware that the battle would not go well. Lee didn't use the stairs because he was so ready to get into the fight. Rather, he leapt to the railing and then descended to the arena, where he was ready to battle directly across from Gaara. Sakura looked down at the two and said, "Naruto," with a nervous tone, "is he really as strong as you said?" "If he's my missing brother," Kakashi said, his head jerking as he looked at Gaara and then Naruto. "Then yes, and more." "Your missing brother," said Kakashi in a composed tone. He sounded a little optimistic, anticipating that Naruto would express doubt. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yep." Kakashi's optimism faltered. "We really need to work on your communication skills, Naruto," sighed Kakashi. "I really wish you had told me about this sooner." As the battle began, Naruto's only response was, "Whoops." The gourd on Gaara's back gushed sand. It moved and swirled like a sick wind around Gaara. He waited with his arms crossed as if in defense. Naruto witnessed Lee adopting the same fighting stance against Sasuke. A second later, Lee was on the run. Suddenly, a wall of sand surged up to block a flying kick that was headed for Gaara's head. Lee began to fall after his kick bounced off the sand, but he quickly got back up and was standing. He paused for a moment to examine and contemplate the sand. Sadly, it only took a second for the sand to clump together in front of Gaara and rise up like a roaring wave, suffocating Lee. Lee prepared himself by back flipping out of the attack's direct line of sight. This was going to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Lee, however, had no other option but to attack the composed red-headed boy and saw no reason to back off. But the sand didn't seem as serene as Gaara. It attempted to affix itself to his arm or leg by lashing out at him like a whip. Lee sidestepped, drew two shuriken, and hurled them at his adversary. As his sand moved to block the projectiles, Gaara did not even bat an eyelid. Lee paused in a ready stance about 30 feet away. Since there was sand all over the floor between them and there was no way to predict how it would move if he tried to attack in such a simple way, he dared not attack directly. Sakura warned, "He'll never win like that," in a concerned voice. She looked up at Kakashi to see if he had an explanation for why Lee hadn't done so, but it was Lee's teacher, Guy, who answered, "He should back off, attack from a distance with ninjutsu." As he watched the battle on the lower level with a faint smile, he responded, "Lee can't use ninjutsu." He seemed unconcerned as he observed Lee evading the blows from Gaara's sand. "When I first met him he had almost no skill at all. Even now he doesn't have any ability with ninjutsu or genjutsu. The only skill he has is hand-to-hand combat, taijutsu. That is why he can win." Only half of Naruto's mind was focused on what the man was saying. The others were preoccupied with the fight. He couldn't help but snicker when he heard the teacher brag that Lee would win. Sand-covered hands reached up from the floor, attempting to grab hold of Lee as he performed a series of backflips out of danger's way. With an amazing leap, he landed on the tiger seal, a sculptured pair of hands. Gaara waited for Lee to descend while keeping an eye on him and drawing his sand back around his body. "Lee!" Guy yelled, causing everyone around him to recoil at the volume, with the exception of Kakashi. "Take off the weights." Lee and everyone else appeared a little taken aback. Even though the stakes were so high, the boy was fighting while wearing weights. Perhaps reluctant to reveal his secret, Lee called back, "But, Guy-sensei, you said I am only to do that when I must protect many precious people." With a thumbs up, Guy exclaimed, "It's all right. This is a special situation." Lee exclaimed, looking perplexed for a second before grinning broadly and chuckling. After removing his leg warmers, he settled into his perch. After being taken off, the onlookers could see that two weight bands had been fastened around the ankles. Sakura paused to give Naruto a quick look. Long ago, when they had first faced Kakashi as a team, she recalled how things had changed. Naruto had boosted his strength and speed and taken off his weighted jacket. Would this situation be the same? Lee was standing with the weights in each hand, seemingly prepared to resume the fight, when she turned to face him again. Lee simply grinned and removed the ankle weights from the statue's sides. When the weights hit the floor, nobody anticipated that they would make such a huge noise. "Okay, I'm ready for a real fight now." Instead of two little sets of weights, it appeared as though two boulders had been dropped. Lee was running along the ceiling and off the statue in a flash. He stamped his footprints into the ceiling. The boy's sudden change in speed startled Gaara. Except for Guy, everyone else was as well. Gaara was behind Lee, who punched her nearly before the sand could stop it. The attack was thwarted, but everyone was taken aback by the closeness to the redhead's cheek. The strikes that followed were even closer. Gaara's shoulder kicked through the sand, but not with enough force to get to the body. The punch then went by Gaara's leg and had the same effect. Guy began to explain, but Naruto was completely uninterested. Did Lee really have a chance to defeat him? Any further thoughts of that kind were cut off when Naruto shook his head. "No," he said in a low voice. "Gaara will not lose." But when Lee pretended to be behind Gaara and the sand began to shift to block the unprovoked blow, his determination was shattered. After flipping Gaara over, Lee gave the redhead a dropkick to the face that actually connected. Additionally, The mark was present even though it didn't appear to cause much harm. Observing Naruto's intent expression, Kakashi kept watching the match. Similar to the previous blow, the next one involved a feint to pull the sand away, followed by an attack to the other side. Gaara was sent flying after a strong blow struck his cheek. He would have fallen hard but for the sand. Naruto shivered after sensing something. He cautioned, "This is not over," and Gaara was in fact rising. Everyone was shocked by his expression when he turned to face Lee. The boy who had been so composed up until this point in the test was no longer so composed. A terrible, silent laugh shattered his face and sent a shockwave through Lee. To make matters worse, a layer of sand began to separate from his face. It showed a cheek that Lee's blows had left entirely unmarked. The 2 strikes Lee had delivered turned out to be minor dings on the armor. Naruto muttered, "Told you," without raising his gaze. In order to reinforce the sand that had been broken off and cover Gaara's body, the sand began to swarm over him. His calm expression returned as the sand poured over his face, except for the hungry expression in his eyes. Maybe hunger for combat, maybe hunger for something else. Gaara asked in a flat, and interesting voice, "Is that all you have?" Lee paused to observe the sand ninja's movements in the sand. As he considered his options, he realized that he needed to take the armor out of the equation. His only thought was for one very strong blow that would pierce the armor and injure the person underneath at the same time. He asked his teacher for confirmation, and he got a nod in return, which he interpreted as approval to employ the method. Lee began removing the bandages from Naruto's arms, but he stopped when they reached the ground. Then he was running around Gaara in a blur of movement, his pounding feet breaking stones and kicking up dust. Gaara's body was constantly encircled by moving sand, which made it difficult for Lee to attack. Lee finally recognized his opportunity. He launched an attack similar to the one he used against Sasuke prior to the first test. He slid in close to the ground and kicked his opponent hard in the chin, sending him flying into the air for the next blow. But Gaara needed more than one kick to get him high enough because of the heavy gourd on his back and the layers of compacted sand. As the kicks came, Gaara protected his face. Lee continued to kick him, each one propelling him higher and faster until he had enough height and speed for the next phase of his attack. Naruto observed with curiosity as it appeared to him that Lee was in a lot of pain due to the strain placed on his body. When Gaara released the armor of sand, Lee winced and failed to notice. Lee didn't notice a slight change in the now empty vessel's dynamic motion. With the bandages from his arm tightly wrapped around what he believed to be the sand ninja, Lee emerged behind the Gaara impersonator. Lee led the replica down onto the hard arena floor after the 2 of them spun quickly and arched through the air. Lee ducked away at the last second, landed, and sagged a little, unwinding a bit while he waited for the dust to settle and reveal the harm done to the red-headed boy. Sakura triumphantly proclaimed, "You were wrong, Naruto," gesturing to her teammate. "You said none of us could beat Gaara, but Lee has done it." Naruto remarked, "It's not over," as he observed the arena below. As the dust settled off the arena floor, Cassie watched too, his eyes glimmering a little. As the last of the dust settled, Sakura turned back to face the arena. She saw a crumbling shell instead of a vanquished Gaara. As the sand behind Lee began to rise and separate from the actual form of Gaara, she covered her mouth and suppressed a scream at the unsettling scene. Sand flew around him and hit Lee squarely in the chest, causing him to slam back against the wall. The sand shifted under Gaara's control as his hands moved back and forth, repeatedly slamming into Lee. Lee did everything he could to deflect the sandstorm's most powerful blows. Almost everyone could see that Lee was in pain, and it wasn't just the sand. The attacks he had made that had damaged his own body were still causing him a lot of pain. The Lotus technique is a double-edged sword, Guy stated. In order to support his claim, Kakashi described how the speed placed a great deal of strain on the body, causing the muscles to tear and break. Naruto kept watching the battle, listening with only half an ear. He was concerned because he could sense Gaara's bloodlust radiating from her. Even though he didn't know Lee well, he would still rather the ninja survive because, after all, he was a Leaf Village ninja. Lee was rolling and performing somersaults, which are simple motions for the average person and poor for everyone in the upper levels who was watching. For a minute or two it went on. Avoiding and narrowly avoiding sand waves and rough, hard streams that, if they hit him, could pound him against the wall. Naruto repeatedly thought that if he were struck even once more, the fight would be over, but it went on. Although it was difficult for some to witness, Lee's teacher grinned down at him and gave him the slightest nod. When Lee looked up, the boy took off once more, his speed redoubled. Naruto looked up to Guy for an explanation as he pondered the source of the new speed. Naruto rolled his eyes in response to the statement, "The lotus of the leaf blooms twice." He then returned his attention to the fight. Kakashi answered Guy's statement after Naruto looked up again. He appeared to be more upset, or at least somewhat irate, at Guy for teaching the method than anything else. As they discussed the inner gates, Naruto listened. He realized that the gates were limitations that evolution had placed on the body to prevent it from destroying itself with its own power. The technique somehow opened the gates, enabling the body to fully utilize its adrenaline, muscles, and other functions. As his body underwent the changes he had come to terms with when he acquired more of Kyuubi's chakra, Naruto pondered whether anything was happening to his own gates. Were they cutting him off or allowing more of his body's potential to manifest, or were they destroying the ones he already had or giving him more? He wished Kyuubi could speak with him so he could truly understand what was going on because he was unable to respond to any of these questions. Lee was opening the gates as Naruto considered these ideas. When he reached the third gate, his skin turned red from the rapid flow of blood through his body. With the possible exception of Gaara, who had to concentrate on defeating an opponent who had returned to his physical peak and beyond, everyone was impressed or in awe of the difference and could feel the strong chakra gathered around his body. Lee's blood pressure was through the roof and his veins were throbbing when the fourth gate opened, but he didn't stop to consider his own health issues because it was time to remove Gaara. He kicked off with such force that the stone tiles exploded beneath his feet. Debris was exploding up from the arena floor, and many people had to cover their eyes as the entire room shook. Gaara was flying through the air with cracks running through his armor all over his body, but no one saw the blow connect. A blur, followed by an explosion, sent Gaara flying in a different direction. It kept happening. Lee could hit him and then run to where he was going before he landed to hit him again because he was moving so quickly. As pieces of Gaara's armor broke and fell, Naruto watched. Gaara was moving too quickly for his other sand to catch up and resupply the armor, which was being practically torn off by the force of Lee's successive blows. Naruto pondered what it must be like to feel your body tearing itself to pieces from the inside out. Lee must be in excruciating pain and will undoubtedly need a lengthy hospital stay after this battle is over. As Lee opened the fifth gate, another chakra burst even in midair. Gaara made an unsuccessful attempt to defend himself with his weapons. He was caught off guard when Lee charged in and punched Gaara in the middle, sending him flying to the ground. That was not the end, though. After Gaara had flown away for about 30 feet, Lee pulled hard, stopping his movement abruptly and pulling him back up towards himself. Lee had slipped the end of his bandages under Gaara's sand. Lee delivered his last blow with a spectacular double blow with his foot and fist. Gaara shot toward the earth with incredible speed. There was no way for his shield of sand to reach him before he hit the ground. Naruto gazed in horror and fascination. Would it be possible to defeat the container for his brother, the one-tailed demon, who undoubtedly possessed a higher synchronization than he did? He held on to the banister, his knuckles white where he waited for the fight to be over. Others let out a gasp when they noticed that the boy's massive gourd, in which the sand had been kept, moved and then transformed back into just more sand. Naruto suppressed a sigh of relief. His teammate might be rooting for the enemy or something, but he didn't think that was a good sign. Gaara was able to avoid being knocked out and losing the match because of the way his sand moved and cushioned his landing on the ground. About 20 feet away, Lee collapsed to the ground, clearly in pain. There was no sand for him to soften before landing. Gaara was seen reaching for Lee as the dust cloud surrounding him dissipated as he stumbled upward. Killer intent was evident as the sand rushed towards him in two streams far faster than the wounded ninja could react. But when a voice called out, they stopped just inches from the boy. "Gaara, that's enough." For a brief moment, nobody moved and everything was motionless. The first to move was Gaara, who turned to face a pair of red, slitted eyes that were observing him from the balcony. Naruto was no longer in his demonic form, but he had changed. His instinct had been to save the boy's life. His eyes were as red as his hair. He also had thicker, darker whisker lines. The other people turned to stare at him, wondering what had changed him so drastically. Lee erred by attempting to use the moment to put an end to the conflict. He was easily blocked by Gaara's sand, which then threw him into a wall. Lee fell from the wall, clearly unconscious but still alive, as the sand retreated and returned to Gaara. Gaara's sand reformed into a gourd and gathered back around him. Gaara won the battle, according to the ninja referee. After using up all of his demonic chakra, Naruto's features returned to normal. He even looked a little paler than usual, though no one made any remarks about it. The teams and Sakura moved away from Naruto's position in a subtle way. The only person who remained near him was Kakashi, perhaps curious about what would happen to him. "Guy, The instructor who had permitted Lee to employ such risky tactics because he so desperately wanted him to win the fight, leapt from the balcony to the spot where his pupil was unconscious on the ground. Gaara stood up and seemed completely unharmed, but nobody could be certain that his wounds were hidden by a layer of sand. Tenten, Lee's teammate, gasped and turned to see that Lee was standing up again. Despite being unconscious, his will to fight caused his body to move into a fighting stance. When the medic ninjas arrived, they immediately paralyzed him to prevent him from resisting their treatments. After examining the green-clad ninja boy, one of them approached Guy and spoke to him in hushed tones. The teacher seemed to be deeply affected by the words, even though the others were unable to hear them. Naruto wasn't paying attention to anything, including the medics. He was looking at Gaara, and she was looking at him. Gaara didn't look away from Naruto until he was back with his teammates. Naruto sighed and let go of the banister railing after he was no longer being watched. After depleting his demonic chakra reserves, he was feeling weak. All he really wanted was to open the wall and speak with Kyuubi about the situation, even though he knew it would come back to him after a night's sleep. Kakashi approached him from behind and touched Naruto's shoulder. As he watched Naruto with his eye open, he whispered, "Are you alright?" Naruto looked at his mentor and shook his head. "Not really. Something's happened," he said, lowering one hand over his abdomen. He glanced at Kakashi to make sure he understood. "You and I need to talk, sensei. Something's happened. My source has been cut off. I can't reach it." Under his mask, Kakashi scowled, and his visible eye took on a solemn expression. "I'll meet you at the hospital when this is done. I'll have people ready to give you a full chakra check to see what's going on," Naruto said with a grin. He noticed that the final two had been called when he glanced down at the arena floor. Dosu, the final member of the Sound Genin, and Shoji. The battle was brief, and Naruto focused mostly on calming Cassie, who had become easily agitated due to the previous battle's conclusion and Naruto's use of demonic chakra. After using his entire demonic aura, Naruto focused on regaining some stability and composure for the time being. Coolly, he pondered whether this was the feeling of a drug addict who had abruptly stopped using the drug and had no idea what would happen. He questioned whether Kyuubi was aware that this would occur or, at the very least, did not believe that the likelihood of such an event occurring was so remote that it was unnecessary to bring it up. He most likely did not witness their total separation, though. Despite his best efforts to hide it, Naruto was feeling very sick. There was a headache forming between his eyes, and it was getting bigger and bigger. In an attempt to suppress the urge to throw up and faint, he closed his eyes. Dosu emerged victorious from the battle with his eyes closed. All of the winners were summoned to the arena floor and lined up in front of the Hokage as soon as that was announced as the final outcome. The Hokage clarified that there were 3 reasons they were given a month to get ready for the test's last phase. The first was to give them time to recuperate from the conflicts they had already faced. The second was to give the key delegates time to get settled and arrive in time to watch the event. The third was to give them time to devise a plan of attack against the opponents that were at their disposal. To decide the pairings and battle order, they pulled numbers out of a box. Naruto versus Neji, Gaara versus Sasuke, Kankuro versus Shino, and Temari versus the victor of the fight between Shikamaru and Dosu were the pairings. It was also disclosed that the fights would be assessed and weighed before a decision was made regarding who possessed the skills to become a Chunin, rather than the tournament itself. At this point, Naruto wasn't really listening. He was trying to focus on staying upright while cradling Cassie in his arms. At this point, the headache was nearly blinding, but he could feel it beginning to subside. He wondered for a moment when it became a migraine and no longer a headache. But he pushed the thought away because it was making his head hurt. Sakura observed from above and was genuinely relieved that she was not a part of the test's last phase. She shuddered because the competitors were so frightening. She was afraid of Naruto's secrets and hidden strength, Neji and his pressure point torture, the Sand Ninja, particularly Gaara, and even Sasuke if she had to fight him. She told herself she could wait until the next time. After they were all dismissed, they were told that in order to protect them from more harm, a Chunin squad would accompany them out of the Forest of Death. A little while later, they reached the forest's outer boundary and were free to do as they please. Sakura took Ino by the arm to accompany her on a walk and discuss something, though she did not go into detail, while she was near Naruto. On the other hand, Naruto set out for the hospital to get checked out and perhaps have his problems resolved. With the playful bounding of a puppy or kitten, Cassie trailed behind him. Kakashi and Naruto met just inside the hospital entrance. He was reading his perverted book while occasionally giggling in a chair in the waiting area. He was surrounded by an undisturbed space left by the other patients who were waiting. either because they were familiar with the book or because they were afraid of what a ninja who was constantly laughing might do. Waiting for Kakashi to put down his book, Naruto approached. When he didn't, he gestured, and Cassie leapt to his feet, using his jaws to snap the book away. After pausing to answer, Kakashi turned to face Naruto. "Oh, there you are, what kept you?" The question was disregarded by Naruto. He muttered, "Can we get this exam thing over with?" and began to make his way back to the exam room areas. Naruto told Kakashi everything about the battle with the snake summon and the man who summoned it with little hesitation. "Sure thing, but two things first. 1. I need to know exactly what happened out in the forest. Both because of what happened to Sasuke and because of what happened to you." He rubbed his belly and glanced down at Cassie, who was idly chewing on the Junin's novel, saying, "Just before he hit me he mentioned something about a seal, though it sounded like his attack." Kakashi added, "I think his name is Orochimaru. He's an incredibly powerful ninja. He's the only one who could have both given the cursed mark on Sasuke's neck and altered your seal in such a way." Naruto seemed excited about the possibility of speaking with the Kyuubi once more in the near future. "Well, who can undo it?" he asked. But Kakashi didn't seem to be as joyful. "That might be a little difficult," he said, observing Naruto's grim expression. "Don't look at me like that. There are few ninja of that power and skill that are around currently. I'll speak with the Hokage. Maybe he will be able to undo it, but don't get your hopes up. The Hokage has to worry about politics and I refuse to get involved in something as crazy as politics." Naruto breathed a sigh of relief and glanced. He stifled a yawn and asked, "Well, what use will this examination be then?" Naruto pondered what it was about this man that worried Kakashi. "Well, it's very important to monitor any changes in the Kyuubi's seal. Especially if it could be changed by someone as cunning as Orochimaru," he said. "Alright, I get it," he sighed. Cassie followed behind, book in mouth, as Kakashi smiled and led him down towards the exam room, saying, "Let's get this over with then." Naruto followed Kakashi into a room where two medical professionals were fumbling with some charts. When they came in and Kakashi cleared his throat, they either ignored them or maybe didn't even hear. However, when Naruto sat down on the examination table, they undoubtedly heard. After dropping the slobber-covered novel on the ground, Cassie leapt up beside Naruto, whose anxious yip was appeased by a scratch beneath his chin. The woman identified herself as Kangoshi, and the male doctor as Hikushi. They began by telling Naruto to take off his shirt and jacket and point out the area that was bothering him. They looked at his belly when he pointed to it. "There was a lot of interference," Hikushi said, adjusting his glasses and frowning. After pointing to Cassie and the amulet, Kangoshi instructed him to move them both to the opposite side of the room so they wouldn't interfere with their examination. Hikushi prodded Naruto's abdomen while Kangoshi extracted what looked like a set of acupuncture needles. Naruto was certain that the man was using chakra, but it didn't hurt or seem to accomplish anything else, so he didn't protest. After all, they were meant to be assisting him. Kangoshi occasionally tapped an acupuncture needle into Naruto's skin while moving her hand over his abdomen. As they turned his belly into a pincushion, Naruto watched. Although it didn't hurt, it was definitely a strange experience. When he turned to face Cassie, he noticed the little fox tinkering with his pendant. He was more concerned about what might occur in the event of an accident and the chakra inside it going haywire than he was about Cassie purposefully breaking it. The kid looked up at him, yipped dutifully, and then sat back and observed. "Cassie, stop messing with that," the kid said. Naruto thought that Hikushi had begun touching the needle ends in a seemingly random order. He scowled and told Kangoshi some medical bullshit, and Kangoshi reciprocated. Naruto dropped a hand from the table and allowed his thoughts to wander as the doctors talked about his condition. He thought of three possible outcomes. First, and perhaps most optimistically, they would figure out how to reverse whatever had been done, go ahead and do so, and he would resume training. The second, less desirable possibility was that they would discover the problem but be unable to fix it. He would then discuss the next course of action with Kakashi. Not knowing what was wrong or how to fix it was the last and least desirable option. If that were the case, he would quit the Chunin exam and begin rigorous training right away. He would then track down the snake bastard and beat him until he stopped trying to undo it. However, it would need to wait for their diagnosis regardless. He felt a tiny furry head being pushed up into his arm after it had been hanging off the table for a few moments. He grinned and began gently scratching Cassie's head right away. The doctors had left and were using what was likely a medical shorthand to write on the dry erase board. Cassie gave a small, anxious whimper. Naruto patted the fox's head and grinned. This seemed to appease the little demon for the time being. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." Naruto's body heat gradually warmed the cool examination table until it reached a comfortable temperature. Naruto's wish to stay awake was thwarted by the repetitive scratching of Cassie's head and the droning of the air conditioner somewhere down the hall. A few feet away from him, the doctors were still talking about his future when his eyes slowly closed and he fell asleep. Leaping onto the examination table, Cassie curled up next to Naruto's head and observed the physicians. Naruto was alone in the examination room and it was well into the night when he woke up. Cassie was sleeping with his shirt and jacket pulled over him for warmth. His amulet had been placed in his hand. The chain locked in place as he put it on. He then put on his jacket after putting on his shirt. He noticed that there was a lot of scrawl on the board that the doctors had been using, which confused him. He looked up at a wall clock and shrugged. It was 3 in the morning, according to the time. A soft tapping from the window caused Naruto to turn sharply, kunai in both hands, just as he was about to lie back down. When he realized that Kakashi was the one who had knocked on the window, he let out a sigh, lowered the blades, and put them away. While still asleep, Cassie rolled over and stirred, revealing his soft white belly. Naruto approached and unlocked the window. Outside his window, he pushed them open and leapt slightly out onto the tree. Kakashi was observing the sleeping village while leaning against the tree trunk. For a few minutes of quiet, Naruto joined him in this activity. Naruto broke the hush by stating, "I'm willing to guess that whatever is wrong it's not easy to deal with." The only answer was, "Nope," and then there was more silence. A pregnant pause. "Well?" Kakashi sighed upon seeing Naruto frown. "Politics," he said. With a gesture toward the Hokage faces etched into the cliff face, Kakashi said, "You've had a high-level seal placed on top of your seal. Probably a 4 or 5-part seal." Naruto whistled softly and said, "And the Hokage is the only person in the village with enough skill and power to do it in your unique case." Kakashi used his good eye to glance sideways at Naruto to make sure the boy understood what he had said. "Indeed. And now this is where politics come into it. No cage may interfere in the case of any single participant or team during one of these competitions, either directly or indirectly." He probably had, judging by the frown. There is still one option. As he heard Naruto's numerous muttered curses about politics, Kakashi nodded and gazed out over the city. A faint smile playing beneath his mask. "Drop out of the exam finals so he can heal me without violating any of the rules." With a cool breeze blowing over them, he waited while Naruto considered it. Naruto gave it some serious thought. Kakashi turned and grinned at the boy, saying, "Nah, not going to do it." This was what he had anticipated. As he listed names, Naruto began to tick off fingers, saying, "There are still too many asses to kick." Naruto shrugged and began to move along the branch in the direction of his window, saying, "Neji, Gaara, Sasuke, that sound guy." He stopped at the window and waited for a response. "I assume there is at least one person searching for people outside the village that wouldn't have politics in the way between themselves and getting my seal back to normal?" he asked. Kakashi nodded and grinned, but Naruto was unable to see it. Naruto had a keen mind, and Kakashi grinned as he said, "2 Anbu teams under my orders. No involvement with the Hokage at all." Naruto turned to face his teacher again and said, "Oh, one more thing." He indicated a partially open window on the floor above and said, "1 level up, 2 to the left." Naruto chuckled and swept through the room, picking up his headband and waking Cassie before slowly making his way up through the building's interior. Empty and above all more comfortable bed if you're not going to go back to your apartment. After locating the room, Naruto entered, shut and secured the door, and then collapsed into bed. Kakashi pushed the window shut from the outside with a gentle click before vanishing into the night. After all, Junin ninjas also require sleep. The following day, Naruto was awakened by a growl and tug on his sleeve. Apparently, Cassie was hungry. The boy stretched and yawned as he sat up. As he left the room, Cassie was pawing at the door and yipping. After throwing his jacket over his shoulder, Naruto left the room. He awoke slowly, a luxury he knew he would not have much of in the upcoming month. He sensed his reserves of chakra. He had a ready and full human reserve. Although it was far smaller than his human chakra, his demonic reserve, which he could now slowly create on his own, was also full. He would need to exercise caution when using his demonic abilities. It was a little challenging for Naruto to walk because the small fox ran around his feet. Before he reached down and grabbed the demon by the scruff of its neck and raised him to eye level, that is. Naruto questioned, "I don't suppose you eat ramen?" Naruto felt a little silly after a nurse who was passing by in the opposite direction burst out laughing at this. Clearly not knowing what ramen was, Cassie simply cocked his head to the side and gazed at Naruto. Naruto sighed and put the fox down as he descended the stairs, saying, "No, probably not." Naruto looked at the front desk register on his way out to see who had been admitted to the hospital following the last battles. The injuries likely weren't that bad, and Sasuke's opponent didn't appear to be hurt. Reminding Naruto that he was going to demonstrate to Neji that fate was not predetermined, Hinata remained in the intensive care unit. Although Lee was no longer in critical care, devoted nurses continued to closely monitor him. Although efforts were being made to save it, one of the sound ninja was also in the intensive care unit, ICU, reportedly with one arm blown off and the other mangled. Naruto wondered if something like that had been caused by that fight. However, he didn't give it much thought. Tenten had only minor injuries when he was released earlier. The nurses and doctors at the hospital itself did not appear to have noticed any other injuries that were severe enough. Before the boy made his way to the door, Cassie pulled impatiently on Naruto's pant leg. The fox then charged forward, interested in everything in the city. Some reminded Naruto of the stigma associated with foxes by giving the small creature plenty of space. The older generation recalled the attack by the Kyuubi. Then it returned to him. Like a half-forgotten nightmare. All those negative glances and irate looks directed at him. Worried that he would be the target of all those glances again, he looked up. He was correct. A few individuals gave the young puppy anxious glances and moved aside, but nobody spoke or gave Naruto the vile glances he had become so used to. When Naruto considered how long ago it seemed, he grinned. There had been a lot of events. It appeared that things were shifting in the direction of a fantastic and promising future. He took a step. He walked toward the store he had grown to know almost as a second home, his armor in the bag over his shoulder. Instead of heading straight to the clothes store, he made a stop at the ramen shop. He consumed 4 of the mega-sized bowls of ramen, demonstrating how hungry he was. People were paying off bets on the likelihood that he would explode right then and there by the time he finished his 4th bowl. To his dismay, he discovered that Cassie had no taste for ramen. However, he was fortunate that Agama, the owner's daughter, thought the small fox was adorable and delighted in giving it some of their meat while Naruto was stuffing himself. Naruto gathered his own winnings from bettors and used some of them to cover the cost of the meal. He was sure he could finish the sum. Then he went to the tailor's, the fox trotting after him. He stopped and grinned outside Wonderland Clothing. After that, he entered. In the back of the shop, a bell rang and the door swung open, tripping a small string. From the back room, where an electric sewing machine was whirring and working, Kibo's voice could be heard. "Be out in just a moment," he delightedly called. The whirring ceased a short while later, and Kibo emerged. "How may I?" He paused, grinned at Naruto, and then, without turning, he drew back the curtains and called his wife again. He saw Cassie peeking out from behind the boy's legs and grinned, letting the curtain fall aside. "Kito, dear, put the kettle on, we've got company." His arms were spread wide. "All right, what are you waiting for?" he asked. "Come on, give me a hug." With a small chuckle, Naruto let the armor bag fall to the ground and moved forward to give the father figure a hug. They simply held each other for a minute. The first to separate was Naruto. Kibo looked at him and raised an eyebrow, wondering what the boy was talking about. About the armor." Then his face lit up with realization, and he let out a moan. He shook his head, picked up the bag from the floor, opened it, and peered down at the armor inside. "You're kidding me," he said. The arms and shin braces had dings and scratches, and the breastplate was bent. "What were you doing to this stuff? Throwing it off a cliff?" repeatedly. When Kito announced that the tea was ready, Naruto began to explain. When they returned, she leapt to embrace Naruto and declared that they would spar following tea. She was concerned that he might have become rusty. After Kito informed her of the armor's condition, she insisted on seeing it because she had worked so hard with Naruto to make it perfect and it had been returned so quickly in its current state. Without omitting the part about the foxes or the fact that Kyuubi had been blocked from him, Naruto sat down and told them everything that had transpired. He accepted that there was nothing that either of them could do to restore the seal to its original state. Kibo said that politics was the reason he couldn't get it unsealed, and that wasn't fair. Kito was the one who soothed her. The 5 major ninja nations are each constantly in competition. It's much like trying to balance 5 marbles on top of each other, each one wanting to be the top ball. Currently it's very precarious with Leaf near or at the top. That makes the other nations uneasy and they may react unpredictably to any sign of weakness or rule breaking. Naruto was listening to him and Kito went to get more tea. Cassie was lying on a heap of soft fabric remnants, napping. They continued their conversation about Naruto's battles. They seemed to know something he didn't know, but he wouldn't pressure them into saying anything they didn't want to. Kibo declared that it was time to spar after they had finished their tea. Grabbing Naruto's arm and leading him to the small space in the back after leaving the back room. They stood in combat positions and observed one another. Whereas Kibo went with water, Naruto went with a wide wind stance. After a brief silence, Naruto launched an attack. He attempted to strike the older woman a few times while attempting to avoid getting caught in his grasp. He was only able to launch 2 attacks, though, before Kibo was hit in the wrist. He was thrown to the ground after it was pulled behind him and up behind his back. This time, Kibo selected Earth, while Naruto leapt up and assumed a fire stance. As he ducked and weaved, he concentrated on forming his chakra to allow for as many afterimages as possible. He was utterly shocked when a solid earth kick landed heavily on the side of his body, sending him sprawling to the ground again. As he stood up, she assumed her own fire stance and held it, asking, "What is going on, Naruto?" The lightning style was Naruto's choice. There were early 3 after images there, and those wind strikes before were slow. He intervened and used his fingers to deliver a barrage of vicious, piercing blows. He only ever hit her afterimages, though. This time, instead of retaliating, she let him attack for a few minutes before switching to water style and flinging him to the ground again. He was confused and in pain as he lay there panting. He sat up and muttered, "What is wrong with me?" It was clear that the sparring was over. Putting a hand on his stomach and reaching down. "Did I eat too much earlier?" He must have been hindered by those 4 enormous bowls. Kido watched from the store's rear entrance and remarked, "No, I think it's something more. I think that you've gotten so used to channeling the Kyuubi's chakra that now that when you try and utilize a skill that relies at least partially on how you channel chakra you can't do it anymore. Like the fundamental nature of the chakra that you use has been changed." Naruto slumps over and lets out an angry scream. "Damn! Damn! Damn!" Watching the outburst, the husband and wife said nothing. They thought it was something Naruto needed to let go of. The end of the tournament is a month away. How am I supposed to learn how to channel my chakra differently than I have for years? He was fuming. He looked at his teachers and tried to relax. After exchanging glances, the husband and wife shrugged and asked, "What am I going to do? What can I do?" Kido grinned and gestured with his hand Kibo. She looked over at Naruto. She gave him a kind smile and said, "There are 2 options as there always are in the ninja world." When he opened his eyes and jumped back up on his feet, Naruto closed them and listened to the words, "Give up or continue forward through any obstacles that come before you." He said, "Well, that takes care of that," and began to relax by stretching a little. Kibo nodded as he went on, "So basically I can't fine-tune, I need to work my entire body. High-level chakra training, right? So something like those tree-walking exercises Kakashi had us doing a while back." He glanced at them. Now it was Kido's turn to respond, "Any idea what kind I might do?" Naruto sat and listened for a few minutes as the fundamental technique was described to him. "That's simple. Water walking." Kido used a basic tub of water to show how it was supposed to be done. Although it was explained that it was simple with just a few inches of water and that it was most difficult at a depth of about 6 feet, it did depend somewhat on the operator's mass. He was informed that the best location for training it was up behind the onsen, where a lengthy stream with varying depths would be extremely challenging for a novice to master. Kido held up a hand to silence Naruto as he opened his mouth to say, "While you're doing that we'll both be making your new training gear." Naruto tried again, but Kido gave him a savage rap on the head. "Hey, who's the tailor here? Don't worry. It will be just what you're looking for now that we know you don't need actual armor." Naruto stopped rolling his eyes a little as she winked at him and said, "Trust my husband. You know he's good at this stuff. He leaves knowing not to bring up the topic of payment." "Okay, come on Cassie." However, he would eventually pay them back for their generosity. After leaving their backyard and returning to the street, he reached down and gave the small fox a finger tap on the head. He yelled, "Tag," and sprinted away before the tiny demon. After a brief period of confusion, Cassie recalled the small games that were played with the other cub mates. Attempting to tag Naruto in return while running after him. They arrived at the ancient onsen on the outskirts of the village in 30 minutes. By the time they arrived, Cassie was proving to be a difficult subject, and Naruto was it once more. They worked their way around the onsen and dodged the springs that were too hot for simple relaxation. After losing him for a short time, Naruto deduced that he had leapt over the wall into the onsen's rear bathing area in order to catch his breath. He sprinted over to the wooden wall, grabbed the top, and heaved himself up to check for the fox. "Hey, have any of you seen a..." Before he could finish his sentence, a towel was slapped across his face. It took him a second to realize how hot it was as he fell back from the shock. "Yaw!" he exclaimed as he pulled it off, gasping for air a moment later, his face flushed from the heat and the mature pictures of what he had witnessed flashing through his head. He remembered why he was there and shook his head to get the thoughts out of his head. Amateur. Naruto searched the area to determine the origin of the term. He saw Cassie up a hill, but no one else. He threw the towel back over the onsen wall after balling it up and then ran after the fox again. From his hiding place in the bushes, the old pervert looked back at the boy and the fox. After a brief chuckle, he turned back to the peephole and made some more notes in his small book. If he saw the child again, perhaps he would give him some advice. Exhausted from all the running he had done during the brief game with the fox, Naruto collapsed by the side of the small stream. He wouldn't be nearly as exhausted from his exertion a few days ago. It served as a helpful reminder of how crucial it was that he begin training in the new technique right away. He forced himself to stand and gazed at the stream. He approached it, knelt, and pressed his hands to the water. He felt resistance when he pressed them against the water while attempting to channel some chakra through them. He gradually raised the pressure. Even though it was helping him focus, he kept going until Cassie yipped and diverted his attention. His arms and torso instantly fell into the stream as his chakra control failed, gasping for air and backing out. After the hot towel a short while ago, the water was pretty cold. He was doing the same thing as Cassie, testing the technique by putting its feet up against the water's surface. Naruto sat back and laughed a little. He pulled off his clothes, including his wet shirt, until he was only wearing his boxers. He kept his pendant around his neck as well. After standing and focusing, he stepped out onto the water after pushing the chakra into his feet. It briefly succeeded before a fish scuttled beneath his feet, shattered the chakra, and he collapsed back onto the beach. However, that didn't deter him. He stood up and gave it another go. He continued to live longer and longer despite a few more setbacks. Because of all the chakra manipulation taking place inside his body, his entire seal was now fully visible, resembling a black tattoo against his belly with different symbols surrounding its edge. He was motivated to put in more effort by the memory of his first brother and the devastation he had caused during the tests. The water was moving more quickly and was harder to control as you walked out on top of it toward the stream's center, forcing him to absorb the technique more quickly while simultaneously expelling a lot more chakra. Alongside him, Cassie was training by walking on the water and using its own feet to push chakra through in order to sustain itself. While Naruto was still compelled to walk, the little demon quickly advanced and was soon running along the water. It only completely felt under a few times in the beginning, but it still occasionally slipped a paw under the water when it wasn't paying attention. Naruto's stomach was beginning to complain as the evening wore on. They managed to capture 4 sizable river fish with Cassie's assistance. From his small bag, which he always carried with him, the young fox collected firewood and a small amount of flame from Naruto's steel and flint. They sat down to unwind by the cozy fire while the fish cooked. At that moment, Naruto heard cries coming from the onsen located down the hill. After a short while, a big group of women with towels hastily wrapped around their bodies ran up the hill. One of them yelled, "Where's that pervert?" while glaring down at Naruto, who was sitting. After blinking a couple of times, he gestured down the river. He was a little frightened of the woman. Naruto wanted to make sure it wasn't himself because her tone had suggested that the person she had called a pervert would experience a lot of suffering in the future. With the intention of ensuring that the person who offended them is never heard from again, the group of women rushed down the stream. A bush not far from Naruto made a few mechanical clicking noises as they were fleeing. Checking on the condition of the fish that was cooking, Naruto muttered, "You can come out now. I'm pretty sure they're gone now." Naruto heard a rustle and turned to see a man outside of a carnival wearing one of the most bizarre costumes he had ever seen. A loose green suit with a long, bright red vest. He was a tall man, easily over 6 feet, and his bright red platform Geta sandals gave the impression that he was closer to 6.5 feet. A good deal taller than Naruto. 2 red lines ran the length of his face, from each eye to beneath his chin. It was a ninja style headband, but it was much larger and had a different pattern. Near the top, 2 tiny horns emerged. But his hair was the stranger's most peculiar feature. Reaching well down his back, it was pure white and considerably longer than Naruto had ever seen on a man. Despite the fact that his hair was quite unkempt, it appeared as though the man had never brushed it. The man chuckled, "Thanks kid," and took a seat on a rock across the fire from him. "What can the great Toad Sage do for you in repayment for this kind deed?" The boy gazed at the man, perplexed. "The great, what?" "Oh, my manners, I forgot to introduce myself," the strange-looking man said. rising to his feet and striking a peculiar pose that made Naruto think of a kabuki show he had once seen. He hopped from foot to foot, putting his hands together in what was clearly something he found impressive. They say there is no man greater than the fabled Toad Sage. In the north, south, east, and even west, there are none who can be said to be greater than he exclaimed. After a puff of smoke cleared, the man was still in the absurd pose, standing atop a rather large toad. And he stands before you now. I am Jiraiya, the Toad Sage. What, you? When the tall man was left alone in front of the boy and the toad vanished from beneath him, he looked disheartened and perplexed. What's that supposed to mean, kid? He asked. He stood there staring at Naruto, dropping his absurd pose. Naruto leaned over the fire and tested the fish to see if they were done cooking. You can't be the Toad Sage, he said. He appeared even more perplexed than before, asking, why can't I be the Toad Sage? I mean, why don't you believe me? Naruto turned the fish slightly and said, the Toad Sage is one of the greatest ninjas of the age at the same level as each of the Kage. Why would one of those great ninjas spend his time peeping at women in the onsen? And even worse, why would such a ninja get caught peeping like that? Well, he began hesitantly. He pulled an orange book out of a pocket and said, I was doing research. I'm also a world-renowned writer. Naruto couldn't quite recall where he had seen the book, but it looked strangely familiar. The sage, who appeared to be taken aback by the small fox's abrupt movement, let go of the book as Cassie bounded around the fire and leapt into the air. Cassie returned the book to Naruto, who took it and turned a few pages while holding it in his jaws. His face was filled with a range of emotions in the brief time it took him to open the book and turn more than 3 pages. Initially, I was intrigued by the writings of this man who claimed to be the Toad Sage. Confusion followed as the pictures abruptly veered toward the pornographic. His initial reaction was one of disgust, but it was soon replaced by a morbid curiosity as he kept turning the pages, occasionally flipping the book from side to side and even turning it over 3 times. When he reached the end of the book, he closed it and hesitated for a moment, considering putting it in the fire, but ultimately decided against it because the smut might destroy the flavor of his dinner. After tossing the book back at the man, he gave him a cunning glance. Jiraiya scowled as she turned the page and located the image Naruto was referring to. Page 63, it's impossible. No one can do that, let alone 3 people. Recalling the inspiration, he blushed and laughed. He laughed, then noticed the expression Naruto was giving him and attempted to regain control of himself. Well, I can tell you it did happen. Okay, I may have embellished a little, they weren't quite that flexible, but I remember all 3 of them quite fondly. Late at night, Naruto nodded after giving it some thought. But it doesn't matter, you saw me summon the toad. That alone should confirm who I am. As far as he knew, Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, was the only one with the contract needed to call forth toads. Naruto removed the fish, threw one to Cassie, and began eating the other while pondering and observing the small stream. He turned to Jiraiya and smiled. It wasn't a question, it was, you know who I am, and what I am, but before nodding, Jiraiya took a moment to carefully consider Naruto. Naruto turned to him and raised his shirt, saying, then you can solve a problem I've got. Jiraiya was about to object when he noticed the changes made to the seal. He quickly took out a notepad and began turning the pages as he looked through it, asking himself, what on earth happened to that seal? He prodded Naruto's stomach with a pen before beginning to take notes, asking, the spiral shouldn't be permanent, and what are these other seals? Not to mention the 5-part seal. Naruto grumbled and turned to Jiraiya expectantly, saying, yes. That's what I want gone. The 5-part seal. It's blocking me off from all the chakra and screwing up my control way too much. As he took some final notes and closed the notebook, he scowled and said, well, what about these? You've got 7 observation seals. Who is watching you, kid? He then directed his chakra into his right hand and began rolling up his sleeve. Naruto nodded and asked, just the 5-part seal? This is going to sting. Naruto only managed to utter the word, sting, before the sage's 5 glowing fingers struck him in the stomach. 5-part unseal. Jiraiya slammed a blow that knocked Naruto cold. With a twist, he withdrew his hand, causing the seals to gradually disappear from his abdomen. He saw Naruto's hair and eyes instantly turn red before returning to their natural hue. Naruto hardly had time to say anything before he heard the voice. Get in here, was all he could manage to say as his thoughts were nearly pulled into the depths of his awareness, where Kyuubi's prison lay. As his real world body began to collapse, Kyuubi growled at him, kid, I swear if you took much longer getting whatever the hell happened undone I was going to rip my way out of you myself. I was going crazy in here. Fortunately, Jiraiya caught him and laid him gently down on the ground next to the fire. There was nothing I could do. There was one insanely strong opponent, Orochimaru of the three sages. He did it. I needed someone else as insanely strong to break it. Naruto clarified. As he began to shape the space behind the barred wall between them, Naruto materialized a chair for him to sit on. I needed to find someone equally as strong. In this case Jiraiya, another of the sages. Since the blocking, it had gone back to its tiny confinement. It grew and transformed once more, turning into the vast, burned wasteland that Kyuubi favored as a home. The Kyuubi spun chakra together behind the bars until it formed the red liquid mass. Well, drink this. Even if the chakra seal is applied again, we'll still be able to communicate. This also has the next segment of your chakra absorption. Naruto created the necessary bowl and managed to catch the liquid by holding it out. He drank it right away after doing so. The taste of the added mixture was spicy but not disagreeable. As the new chakra moved through Naruto's body, Cassie curled up on his stomach and began to hum softly. His hair changed slightly before returning to its original blonde state. What the hell did I just do to you, kid? Jiraiya began to stand up, ready to replace the seal to prevent it from going any further, but he hesitated after the little fox growled at him. Even though he didn't think the little fox could accomplish much, it was better to be safe than sorry in situations like this. If you say so, but if I see this going wrong I'm going to do it. Naruto sighed after finishing the bowl and felt it take hold of him. A twinge of pain shot through his chest, making him wince a little. He scowled a little and ran a hand across the center of his chest. What was that? It had never occurred before. What is the problem? Kyuubi growled, still a little annoyed at being confined in total darkness once more. Nothing, Naruto said, brushing the pain aside because he didn't give it much thought. His body had repeatedly shown that it could handle it. Alright, tell me what happened. I sense 2 chakra signatures outside your real body. One of them is a fox. I'm curious as to how this has come about. Jiraiya watched as Naruto dove into it while his body rested, saying, okay, it's a long story. Before dozing off against a tree, Jiraiya had been writing notes in his notebook about what he had seen the previous day and drafting a chapter when he fell asleep. The sound of laughter roused him. While both of them were standing solely on the water, Naruto was running around on top of it as though it were solid ground, dodging back and forth and attempting to splash the young fox from the previous night as it attempted to do the same to him. Jiraiya was impressed, he had to admit. It seems that the Kyuubi's chakra enhanced his skills more than he had initially believed. As he observed the boy having fun, he reflected on the 4th Hokage and his potential when he was Naruto's age. That potential coupled with that power. Hey kid. Naruto skidded across the water's surface and stopped just as Cassie wheeled his tail to shoot a spray of water, catching Naruto in the side of the head and causing him to lose focus, fall backwards, and submerge himself. He spluttered, no fair, as he surfaced, clambered back to the water's surface, and stepped ashore. Jiraiya observed that, seemingly at random, his hair alternated between a brilliant blonde and an equally brilliant red. Naruto appeared to be oblivious. Behind him, Cassie bounded along, clearly pleased with his triumph. He pointed the finger accusingly at Jiraiya, saying, I was distracted, you owe me a ramen. Naruto frowned, clearly struggling to decide between a new super awesome technique and some ramen. Sure kid, but tell me this. Would you rather have some ramen or a new super awesome technique? His brow furrowed in focus as he crossed his arms and considered it. Jiraiya scowled. Did he really need to consider it? What kind of technique? Naruto inquired, a little wary of receiving a mediocre technique in return for the ramen that was missing. He took a moment to reflect on his vast toolkit and said, well, I was going to offer you a summoning contract. But with that kind of attitude, I think we'll wait a bit before thinking about that. How about my hair techniques? Naruto reached up and ran his finger through its crimson locks, saying, no thanks, besides, why would I want to style my hair? It's perfect just the way it is. He stopped and drew a small strand of hair down to reveal its color. It faded to his natural blonde as he stared at it. He muttered something to himself. Huh, new infusion is trying to force it, but Jiraiya cut him off. He assumed a stance and began the hand seals, saying, no you stupid kid. I mean my hair ninja techniques. Here, watch. Underworld Guardian spikes. His hair started to grow longer, encircling his body and spiking outward, forming a shield that encircled his entire body. After a brief moment of holding it for Naruto to see, he let go of the jutsu. His hair grew back to its long, organic length. Naruto had a contemplative expression. There are more? Jiraiya asked, grinning broadly as she nodded. Another nod. And not just defensive? Naruto kept thinking while looking down at Cassie, who was already attempting to shape his fur with chakra, with intriguing but unsuccessful results. Alright, you've got a deal. Naruto, who had clearly never attempted to mold his own hair with chakra, intentionally, at least, was taught the hand seals and molding techniques by Jiraiya for the remainder of the day. But his hair was already vulnerable to the technique because of the demonic chakra's effects on his body. He quickly picked up the first fundamental technique Jiraiya had demonstrated to him earlier, though it would undoubtedly require more practice before he became proficient. At the moment, it only grew down his back rather than encircling his body, but it was difficult and the spikes were extremely sharp. Oddly, even though Naruto was certain he wasn't using any demonic chakra, whenever he molded it through his hair, it instantly turned the bright red that typically denotes its use, regardless of how hard he tried. The second method he was shown was the wild lion's mane, which, if he executed a final seal, would cause his hair to grow outward and then solidify, potentially killing anyone trapped inside. Although he struggled with length and was unable to match Jiraiya's 40 feet of hair, he anticipated eventually being able to reach it farther than his current 10-foot reach. Using this method also produced the same red effect. Until he was satisfied with those two methods, Jiraiya would not teach him any more. After 3 days, Naruto finally succeeded. He could either produce 20 feet of hair that would harden and trap to Jiraiya's delight or cover his body with a protective layer of razor-sharp spines. Cassie had developed its own new techniques, but they were not as sophisticated as Naruto's. Although it appears that the fur would not grow as long as Naruto's, they could easily become just as sharp, if not more so. The young fox started working to make the fur as long and sharp as it could be without limiting its range of motion. It was challenging to shape it to fit some places while maintaining others' natural length, such as the insides of the legs, but it worked wonders as they sparred together before supper every day. After using the technique a few times, Cassie would be worn out, and Naruto would return with numerous cuts and scratches all over his body. The little fox, which was now frequently only identifiable in combat as a red dot and white blur and the sting of a fresh wound, had also been working on increasing its speed to higher levels. Jiraiya enjoyed hurling kunai and shuriken at them while they sparred and shouting tactical advice to both of them, even though she didn't participate in the fight directly. Jiraiya proceeded to teach Naruto the wild razor tail technique. It was a method that involved extending a section of his hair from the back of his head into a long whip. With a blade of sharp spines running the length of the whip, the Jiraiya could control its length from 10 feet to 60 feet. He twisted his body and slashed the hair at a tree 40 feet away to show how to use it. As it wrapped around, the spines sank deep into its trunk, and when he pulled his hair back, it was sliced down like a chainsaw slicing in from all sides. With his mouth hanging open, Naruto watched as the tree fell over. Jiraiya advised him to concentrate on obtaining it initially, but that with practice, he would be able to control it solely with chakra and without any movements. After several attempts, Naruto was able to achieve a respectable 16 feet of hair, and although he was unable to control its length or movement, Jiraiya told him it was a suitable length for practice. Despite Naruto's best efforts to conceal it, Jiraiya saw some differences in his fighting style and intervened during a sparring match during the second week. He didn't appear overly pleased that the child in front of him had been concealing something. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked. "You're slowing down, distracted, and in pain. What happened?" Naruto attempted to dismiss it, saying, "Nothing's wrong," and turned to face Cassie again, but Jiraiya grabbed his shoulder and threw him around. He scowled down at the boy, more solemn than Naruto had ever seen him before, and said, "Don't lie to me. You tell me one more lie and I'll not only stop training you, but go to the Hokage and get you pulled from the exam." He hesitated even though he had no doubt that the man would do it. Seeing the hesitation, Jiraiya let go of him and turned to go to town. Jiraiya halted and turned to him, saying, "It's the chakra, alright." He approached a rock and sat down, holding his head in his hands, saying, "The demonic chakra, it's too much for my body. Kyuubi says we were too eager, moved too fast. The chakra is starting to overwhelm my coils and damage my body. I heal the damage, but my stores of demonic chakra are growing naturally now, drawing directly from Kyuubi without the periodic infusions, but slowly." Jiraiya proposed 5 parts seal, but Naruto shook his head. "It's too late for that, and if cut off from Kyuubi, my healing decreases. There are 2 options. Either I go slowly and hope that my body can change, become demonic enough over time to accept the growing chakra, which will be slow and painful. Or we go fast. Immediate and full transfusion, which would probably rip me apart from the inside out in a massive explosion if I don't manage to become fully demonic." He breathed a sigh of relief and glanced at his Either way it's painful, and might kill me. Jiraiya sat on a log across from the fire pit they were using and said, bleed it off. He rubbed a tiny spot on his arm, where a cut from the sparring had already shrunk to a scratch and was about to vanish. That's what the sparring is for. But it's just like normal chakra in that manner. The more I exercise it, the more comes back. Kyuubi and I have a plan. He knows a place where I can go. A place where I can go to get help and train. I'm going to go there after the exam. Probably a good idea, said a sulky voice from the dense forest across the river. When the voice spoke, neither Jiraiya nor Naruto felt anything, and they both leapt to their feet and took up fighting positions in awe as the enormous man emerged from the forest. He was easily 7 feet tall, 5 feet wide at the shoulders, and his large body was covered in hair and pelts. Long arms and what could only be called a bear-like build. Third brother? Naruto asked, letting go a little as the enormous man moved forward and took up residence across the stream. Jiraiya also became a little more at ease, looking at Naruto with interest as he remained silent about his meeting with the siblings. With a nod, Sandy's human form launched a hand into the water, swatting a fish into the air that he caught with ease using the other hand. The others appeared out of nowhere. Like the little mole of a man from the last time, Nibby emerged from underground, munching on a small bag of some sort of treat. The water rose and twisted into Shibi's fully human form, with deep, sunken skin instead of blue or scaled skin. She was dressed similarly to before, but in a blue bikini, which instantly caused Jiraiya to bleed from her nose as she sat in a provocative position in the shallows of the water. A woman with white hair and a pale complexion approached them from a path that neither of them would deny existed just a moment before. She was identified as the Gobi by 5 black stripes running down the back of her form-fitting, formal kimono. Gobi had to sidestep to avoid her as the Rokubi fell from a tall branch, laughing. 6 braided ponytails hung past her shoulders, and she was dressed in armor and tight acrobatic apparel. Nanabi didn't really emerge. Instead, she emerged from behind the massive figure of Sanbi, an elderly woman who was still remarkably attractive and was learning on an ebony cane while wearing a black kimono. Over her heart, she had 7 stars emblazoned on it. Sanbi, who appeared somewhat embarrassed, swiftly finished eating his fish and wiped his fingers on his furs after she gave him a disapproving click. Wearing a plain white kimono and carrying a jug of sake in his hand, Hachibi approached the party from around the bend in the river. Calm and lanky, he sat against a tree, looking a little awkward. Nanabi started off by observing her siblings and saying, "Seems like we all had the same idea." Rokubi muttered, "Stranger things have happened, but it wasn't quite quiet enough." Hachibi yawned and swigged his sake. "Name 3, he said. Rokubi declined to respond to his remark. Jiraiya was growing increasingly impatient. "Would someone please tell me what is going on?" she asked. None of these people gave him any sense at all. They were obviously very powerful, but he was unable to sense even a hint of it, which worried him even more than if he had sensed their full strength. Naruto placed a hand on his arm in an attempt to soothe him, but it had little effect. "These are my siblings. My family," he said. He glanced at his siblings and saw that, aside from Gobi and Nanabi, who clicked her cane against a pebble, none of them quite met his gaze. "You might want to go. This is probably not something you should be here for." The others nodded in turn, with the exception of Gobi and Hachibi, who most likely did so because he was taking another swig from his jug. "He is one of the Sannin, and what we have to say may concern him as well," she said. "No, this is a family issue. No matter how powerful this human is, he is not one of us," Gobi replied. Nanabi nodded, "Your objection is noted," to her sister, who gave her a cold look but remained silent. She turned to Naruto and said, "A grave situation has come to our attention." Naruto appeared unimpressed as he said, "Demons are disappearing." Nibby laughed, "He doesn't get it," and picked up a rock. He inhaled deeply, then slowly shaped the rock into a smooth bowl as he exhaled. He held up the empty bowl after finishing. He dipped the bowl into the stream and said, "This is an animal, basic, unthinking, and surviving." He raised the bowl, half full of water, and said, "The river is the power of nature, overflowing and powerful, but some of it can be contained." He pointed to Cassie, who was curled up by Naruto's feet, shivering a little as he watched the great beasts in human forms. "This is a demon, a natural creature infused with some of that power of nature, making it more than it was. This little one, for example, is a fox, with the merest drop from the stream." Holding the bowl above the stream, he said, "When one of these demons dies, shattering it in two, causing the water to fall into the stream." He dipped one half into the stream and drew out a small amount of water in the bowl's remaining portion, saying, the power that they gained from nature returns, and mixes until another creature has the potential or knack and draws some more out. He then threw the fragments farther down the stream. Do you understand? Naruto nodded. Kyuubi had given him a lengthy lecture on demons a while back, but he had never understood it completely until now. He would occasionally rant about something related to teaching. Kyuubi snorted from inside his head, seemingly listening to his thoughts. That's because you don't pay attention when I'm trying to teach you something, other than a new technique, he said. Jiraiya cut in, so you're saying they aren't dying, but have gone missing? Not exactly, Rokubi said with a sigh before settling in and adjusting one of her braids. In the past few years a few bodies have been found of former demons, with their power gone. We naturally assumed that a new being had taken it up, and we didn't see them because they were hiding or didn't know the power. She laughs. It happens more than you would think. However, Gobi said, glaring at Jiraiya briefly before continuing. Recently more powerful demons are dying, demons whose powers we would have felt returning to the stream or entering a new host. A lieutenant of mine, a powerful snow wolf, his body was found a week ago, a husk of his former self, dead, power gone. 2 rocks, Rokubi said. Everyone gave Shibi a curious glance. An Aspodok alone, they said. Frustrated, she let out a sigh and gave the water a little splash. She gazed into the water, exasperated, and said, it's a massive turtle, got an island on its back. He even had a little forest. He was my friend for more than 200 years. And now he's dead, even his forest has withered. Sandy's rage flared, and a fist crashed into the floor. Before Nanabe placed a hand on his shoulder, the others appeared somewhat alarmed. Embarrassed at his loss of self-control, he turned and growled at her before pausing and glancing down. He snarled, balling both big hands into enormous fists. It's not right, he said. They should not have been taken like this. The balance is upset. The trees are worried. Hachibi pushed off from his tree and said, he's right, for the first time. He placed his jug of sake in front of Sanbi, who accepted it and took a huge, soothing gulp of the alcoholic beverage. We've all noticed it, the decline. Many demons have gone now. Though we tend not to concern ourselves with the lesser of our kind. But this now is much too much to be ignored. Who could do this? She looked at Jiraiya and his peculiar appearance and attire. My winds are afraid, but they bring me news of a few strange men, she said. Stranger than normal in any case. Men in black cloaks with red clouds. They were seen after 2 of the attacks, leaving the area. But my winds were too afraid to get too close to these men after what has been happening. Shibi sighed and splashed the water in frustration again. A sunfish mentioned something similar to me, but I hadn't made the connection. They were seen days apart from the attack. Akatsuki, Jiraiya was the center of attention. My contacts have been whispering about this group for 10 years or so, but recently the whisper has turned into a buzz. They're all incredibly powerful shinobi, none less than a class. All wanted by each of the elemental countries. I have a few names, but nothing more than that really, except that they travel around in 2s and are looking for something. And, they always wear black cloaks with red clouds. Jiraiya discovered that everyone there, including Naruto, was watching him closely. He saw Naruto's eyes had turned from a vivid blue to a brilliant red. He noticed that the other people's eyes had also changed. In addition to the colors blue, green, white, gold, black, red, and turquoise, there appeared to be a tan shimmer that was obscured by Nibi's glasses. His life might depend on what he said next, so he had to make a choice. There is another problem, you see, Nanabe said slowly as she continued to observe Jiraiya with her dark eyes, which nevertheless had a faint inner glow. Our 9th brother, she said, glancing briefly at Naruto. He contains a phenomenal amount of the demonic chakra that we mentioned before. If he were to die by normal means, the chakra would return to the stream and might help to correct some of the balance that was lost. However, should his chakra be removed in this fashion, and not return to the source, then irreparable damage could be done. This, combined with the state of his transformation, makes this quite troubling. We will conduct our own searches for this Akatsuki group, but I suspect your own searches would prove more fruitful. Jiraiya gave a small nod, perplexed as to why they would divulge this information to him. 8 of the 9 great beasts were vulnerable, and he could now clearly identify what they were. They might be controlled or eliminated. The Akatsuki were far more powerful and dangerous than he had ever imagined if they were doing this, and he knew what needed to be said at that point, for their future as well as for himself. I swear on my honor that none of the information you have given me here will be relayed to another person by any means, even torture. I will give you all the information I have on Akatsuki and do more searching into their means and who is part of the group. Any information will be given to Naruto. The rest of the group looked at each other and nodded in acceptance. One last thing, began Shibi, emerging from the water and crossing it to Naruto. Please train him, she said, looking at Jiraiya while putting an arm around him. Jiraiya nodded without hesitation, saying, we cannot afford to lose him. And I've grown quite fond of him. In any event, he had intended to train Naruto. Now, before we go, lift your shirt. Naruto obeyed the order despite appearing perplexed. Shibi took the lead and touched the scale he had left on his stomach when they first met. A cool sensation spread across his body from where her finger was, and she said, you've demonstrated the ability to adapt under variable situations and never give up during times of change and diversity. As the image twisted and swept into the spiral, the scale seal began to fade. You have passed my test. The great bear of a man crossed and knelt down, pressing a long fingernail against the leaf, saying, you have shown your respect for nature and the balance. You have shown great strength and the potential to grow into something tremendous. The leaf twisted and followed the other symbol into the spiral, saying, you're a good kid. Gobi crossed the water and brushed a cool finger over the snowflake, which melted into the spiral on his belly. A cool mind in the most conflicted and heated situations. Not perfect, but you've done much better than I expected. You have passed. Nanabe grinned as she came forward and said, yes, I was watching during the exam. You had the option to tell the truth and do the right thing, but you chose to cheat. She used the tip of her staff to tap his stomach. The crescent moon curled and twisted into the spiral, saying, you have a touch of the darkness in you. And you'd never be able to survive in this world of ninja without it. Then Nibi moved forward. Where is our first brother? He asked, grinning and wearing sparkling black spectacles. Naruto grinned back. He is sealed inside Gaara of the Sand, a genin of the hidden sand. Nibi smiled. After another touch, the geode folded in on itself and dropped into the spiral. Finding what is hidden, a special skill to have. Cultivate it well. Be sure to go to him for the final seal. Rokubi landed in front of Naruto after jumping across the stream and saying, you've gotten lucky with these exams. A gentle finger touched the spiral, and the feather blew into it as well, leaving only the sun marking behind. You've been able to prove yourself quite well. Being able to cultivate skills and friendships, pulling people together, breezes becoming winds twist together into a powerful storm. Hachibi shook his head as Naruto turned to face him, expecting him. He sighed softly, you have the light, but you aren't ready for my blessing yet. But this exam isn't over. You may yet prove yourself well before the deadline. He did a little stretching. He began to leave after saying, we'll be holding you to what you said, Jiraiya. And we're looking forward to seeing you at the final exam. Knowing that he still had a lot of work to do, Naruto lowered his shirt and asked, what? Nanabe gave the young boy a gentle smile and asked, didn't we tell you? We're going to be coming to see your final exam. With a sultry wink at Jiraiya, Shibi said, train well, and slipped back into the water. She laughed and dissolved into the water, saying, we're looking forward to your exam. We'll be coming in our real bodies for that. The others said their goodbyes and began to vanish too. Nibi transformed into a pile of gravel. With a laugh, Rokubi blew away and vanished into the wind. As he left, Hachibi disappeared into a blaze of light. Gobi's body landed in a mound of snow that vanished in an instant. Sandy rose and moved toward the trees, disappearing into the forest. Nanabe watched Naruto while she waited for the others to vanish. She looked him in the eyes, her glistening black meeting his flaming red. I didn't want to say this in front of the others. There is an option, one that they would not be proud of. However, it is my duty to think the dark thoughts. Should you find yourself in a situation where the Akatsuki may capture you and manage to seal your chakra away, if you have no way out, it is your duty to take your own life. To make sure that your chakra returns to the stream. The world will right itself in time. I have seen it survive incredible things and we will help it survive. Jiraiya became angry with her and said, you can't ask him to do this, he's just a kid. Calmly, it's all right, Naruto said. He growled softly at her, saying, it's part of her duty to say this. And I understand. But only if there is no other way out. She gave a nod. One last thing, she said, jabbing her staff into his abdomen. Her form unwound into shadows and vanished into the background with this final warning. The seals should help your body absorb the chakra and prevent further damage. But only for a month, 2 on the outside, after that your body must change, or risk death. Jiraiya and Naruto were silent for a long time. Cassie is whining a little about the events as she peeks out from behind Naruto's leg. You've got a messed up family, kid, Jiraiya said with a long sigh before settling back down on the log. Naruto sighed and returned to his fighting stance, saying, you have no idea, Let's get serious now, shall we? Yay, let's, Jiraiya said, nodding before assuming his own fighting stance and finally participating in the sparring. The second phase of the Genin exams had concluded a month ago. From all over the continent, dignitaries, traders, affluent businesspeople, and significant political figures had arrived gradually at the hidden village of Leaf. The commotion of welcoming the guests now filled the city. To draw in the important people and possibly gain some recognition, stores displayed their best products and eateries displayed their finest silverware. Therefore, when 9 strangers approached the front gates, it wasn't too strange. The first was a tall, slender monk with a sun emblazoned over his heart on off-white robes. The robes appeared to shimmer slightly as he walked. They were made of fine silk, the color of fresh cream. But it was strange that he arrived alone for someone so well dressed. The jug of sake swinging languidly from his left hand was even stranger. His eyes were obscured by white opalescent glasses, his face was long and somewhat angular, and his bald head reflected the bright day's light. It was an odd sight, but not the most strange thing they had seen in this village. The gate's ninja were busy examining a merchant's caravan to ensure they had the proper documentation. They would be with him shortly. One of them gestured to the man. He nodded and took a seat cautiously on a broad, dark stone that had been left untouched, heated from the day's accumulation of light, a dozen yards or so from the gate, just outside the village. After acknowledging the monk, the ninja continued their work, saying, "Take your time. I'm waiting for some people." Shortly afterward, the second individual showed up. She was a considerably shorter woman with 6 elaborate braids in her brown hair. To the delight of several young children who followed her, she wheeled her cart down the street. She had a mountain in copper thread on her back and was dressed in a short, light blue kimono, which is popular among kunoichi due to its flexibility and light weight. Not far from the rock where the other stranger was sitting, she halted her cartwheeling and turned to face the kids. She took some candy out of a small bag and gave it to them. She sent them off to their parents, who were occupied with transporting merchandise to the marketplace for sale. Her angular features lit up with a smile as she tuned into the man dressed in monk's robes. She approached and took a seat on the rock as well, but they didn't say anything to each other, as if they were content with the quiet. Others eventually emerged. The next was an elderly woman with silver hair in a single braid down her back and stately features. She had on a long kimono with a silver moon over her right breast and big black sleeves. She had a long black walking stick in her hand. She was accompanied by a servant girl with a pixie dot cut and black hair. Although she didn't appear to be as at ease in it as the older woman, the girl was dressed in the same style of black kimono. She carried the pack over her shoulder and fidgeted all the time. There was also a woman in the finest white silk, a snow scene embroidered into the fine fabric, shaded by a white parasol. Everyone who saw her instantly dubbed her the Ice Queen, due to her white hair, pale features, and arrogant demeanor. In addition, she brought a submissive servant girl dressed in white robes like her master, but with doves in place of snow. A sea of admirers followed a woman wearing a deep sea green kimono. The reason for this was very clear. She was wearing a thin kimono that clung provocatively to her body. Her alluring appearance was enhanced by her musical voice, flirtatious demeanor, and dark blue hair that fell down her back. But when she noticed the people near the stone, she brushed off her admirers and sat on the rock, taking off her sandals and dipping her feet into a tiny pool of water that had escaped the sun in the rock's shade. A huge man approached them wearing a kimono that fit him surprisingly well. To the amusement of the girl in sea green and the one with the braids, he didn't appear very at ease in it. On his robes a forest was displayed. He sat down and moaned to himself, but like the others, he eventually fell silent. The 2 ninja guards, who would periodically look over at these strangers, were beginning to feel uneasy in the silence. However, they could only be recognized by their rich clothing and silence, and the wealthy were permitted to have many quirks. None of them moved like ninjas and none of them had any discernible chakra. These 8 created an uneasy feeling that they attempted to ignore. Things changed with the 9th character. The man in the brown kimono said, "Ah, good, you're all here," as he entered the gate and approached the others, who began to stand up upon seeing him. His face was pinched, and he wore black sunglasses. He began passing various items to them after reaching into a pocket and taking them out. He gave a necklace containing sets of various colored opals to each person, saying, "These will help suppress our natural affinity." He gave a string of 7 black opals on a black silk cord to the woman dressed in black, who took it and wrapped it carefully around her neck. The others did the same. 3 gave the biggest man green, 4 gave the woman in sea green, 5 gave the woman with white hair, 6 gave the woman with braided hair, and 8 gave the lanky monk white that glittered in a variety of colors. 2 amber opals hung from the brown man's necklace. He glanced at the 2 servant girls and said, "And I have sets for 1st and 9th as well, when they are ready," his eyes briefly glimmering behind his glasses. He produced 2 silver rings, one set with onyx and the other with moonstone, from another bag and said, "As for you two, here, take these." He winked at them as they each took one to match the color of their kimono. "They will disguise your other chakra as that of a human's," he said. "This is a village of highly trained shinobi, we must be careful not to reveal ourselves. That means we can't have any fun." The black-clad servant girl whimpered, not quietly enough, and her mistress gave her a stern look. "Sorry, ma'am." The ninja on duty at the gates moved forward as the 9 strangers got closer. One extended their hand. After glancing at his hand, they turned back to face him. With her servant chuckling softly behind her, the woman in black said, "Yes? What do you want?" "Your name and identification papers, ma'am. We need to know who you are before we can let you into the village," he patiently replied. He was good on guard duty for a reason. He never lost his temper, even when he had to repeat the same information to people over and over. However, he was beginning to feel the effects of this day. This encounter, however, was unique. The woman stared at him sharply and sternly. She said in a calm, gentle voice, "You don't need to see our papers," addressing all of the other ninjas present, including the 2 additional ones concealed in the trees on either side. "As for our names, we are Clan Uzumaki." "I don't need to see your papers," he said, glancing down at his clipboard to write the clan's name before turning to face her and grinning. "Welcome to the village of Leaf. We hope that you enjoy your stay." "Oh, we will," she said with a smile, and as they passed through the gate, her servant chuckled once more. The guard glanced down at his clipboard and said, "Huh," he shook his head and went back to his work, saying, "I only know of one Uzumaki. Nah, there's no way they're related." A gentle kick to the shoulder roused Naruto. After the sparring, he had once more dozed off on the banks of the small river. As a result of extensive training, his clothes were rather tattered. His headband was tattered as well, having been repeatedly punctured by hair spikes. In contrast, his body was in excellent shape. All of the wounds and bruises he sustained during the sparring had healed, and his chakra system appeared to be adjusting to the new chakra well, at least with the extra protection his siblings had given him. Jiraiya nudges his shoulder again with his sandal as Naruto begins to stir. "Come on, kid," he said. "I let you sleep a bit late so you'd be rested for today. It's going to be a long one, that's for sure," he said with a grin. Murmuring, "Pervert," Naruto sat up. Cassie had caught a fish and was munching on it. Recalling the day, the young ninja grinned, leapt to his feet, and began to run into town. Cassie barking at his heels. Naruto bounded off, the fish already forgotten, saying, "Come on, old man." Jiraiya wondered where Naruto was going. Most likely to get food, and followed him. However, Naruto ran for a small clothing store instead of the food market, though he did slow down a little as he passed the ramen stand. Kibo was chatting up a customer in front of the store who was dressed in delicate red and purple. He explained to her how the vest he was displaying could conceal 6 thin knives in the lining. He smiled as he saw Naruto approaching. He took a moment away from the customer to embrace Naruto before pushing him in the direction of the door. Naruto smiled and gave him another hug before hurrying inside, Jiraiya trailing behind him. "Go see Kido, she has had everything set up for you for the past week." He considered purchasing some of the excellent ninja attire available here for himself. There was a lot of activity inside the store. It appeared that the Genin exam finale was being handled more like a carnival. When Kido noticed Naruto, she was behind the register, ringing up a customer's purchase. After she had completed ringing up the customer, she came out from behind the counter and gave Naruto a big hug, which he reciprocated. She then took a step back and gave him a forceful head knock. She reprimanded him, saying, "That's for not contacting us for a month." A few patrons turned to observe, one of them laughing at Naruto's unkempt appearance. She inserted her finger into one hole on his shirt and then hooked it through another that was less than an inch away, saying, "You look like you've been living in the forest of death." Naruto rubbed his head with one hand and attempted to swat her hand away, saying, "It's good to see you too." She sighed and swatted him again. She shoved him to the back of the store, saying, "What are you doing here? You should be getting ready." She gently pushed him through the back curtain and then bent down to pick up Cassie before the cub could run in after him. "Second dummy on the left, might be a little big. We left some room for growth." Before leaping out of her arm and nuzzling her shin, the small fox curled against her chest and barked in agreement, asking, "How about we get you some jerky to chew on?" Although it wasn't exactly what he was looking for, Naruto discovered the equipment exactly where she had promised. The body armor was nearly gone, replaced by what appeared to be a red hoodie with a very light chainmail underneath and a zipper along the front. After carefully searching, he found a dozen locations where the hoodie concealed multiple knives, including slits along the back for thin knives and small shuriken and senbon. All told, he reasoned, the one garment could conceal 24 tiny blades with ease and still look the same. Because it was made of a lighter fabric than most sweatshirts, the hoodie had a different weight. It was a combination of materials that allowed for easy breathing while providing some protection by being at least somewhat difficult to cut through. The pants had similar hidden pockets in the same material, but they were a darker shade of red. His other equipment was stored in a belt with several pouches, and Naruto discovered that they were already filled with typical ninja gear. He just needed to move a few of his unique items over to make it ideal. After so much training, his shuriken and kunai were hardly more than useless, so this was pretty good. He had undressed and was putting on the new trousers when he saw shin guards and bracers on the work table. After putting the pants on, he stood up to take a look. They appeared mostly finished, with the exception of the fittings that were the right size for their future owner. The single-piece shin guards had straps and minimal internal padding. They weighed significantly less than earlier models. Additionally, compared to earlier pairs, the bracers were notably lighter. He slipped them under his pants, shin guards first, and they were perfectly concealed. Subsequently, he donned the bracers, almost erupting in shock as a long, single blade emerged along the bracer's outer edge as he twisted his right wrist to fasten the straps on the left bracer. The blade vanished back into the concealed slot as he turned his wrist in the opposite direction. "You can try molding elemental chakra into those once you're good enough," Kibo said from the back room's entrance. He came over and checked the shin guards and bracers to make sure they were attached correctly. "Well, should be able to. We didn't have time to really test those out well enough. Kido could only manage it when using the elemental stances." After giving a nod, he stepped back to observe Naruto. "We tried various armor ideas. The Kevlar of the top layer, along with the chainmail, will help a lot without impeding movement like any heavier armor. Altogether it weighs about 8 pounds, almost nothing to a ninja." Naruto experimented with a few light jumps and discovered that, although he landed a little heavier than before, it was still manageable. He molded some chakra along his arms and tried a few of the kata for fire. The blades erupted, and he saw a noticeable reddening of the edge of the blades, which left a smoldering impression when he pressed it against the table's edge. After the blades cooled, he pulled them back and gave Kibo a firm embrace. The tailor shoved him toward the door after giving him a hug in return. "Wait. One last thing," Naruto informed the man, removing his worn headband. Kibo laughed as he carried it to a workstation, where he removed the frayed cloth and extracted remnants of red Kevlar. He threaded a needle with practiced ease, and the headband was fixed in no time at all. Proud to be wearing a symbol he trusted, Naruto took it and firmly tied it to his forehead. After he ruffled Naruto's hair with his hand and said, "Now get going, make us proud. We'll be watching the finals on TV." The boy rushed outside. He instructed Cassie to remain with the two store owners. He waved goodbye to Kyoto, who shooed and laughed as she looked at the stack of items Jiraiya was purchasing. He attempted to bargain with her by offering her a signed copy of his book. Shortly afterward, he departed with a bag full of stuff, a considerably lighter wallet, and a well-deserved black eye. Pulling up his hood, Naruto dashed toward the arena, swerving between people so that most people saw him as little more than a red blur. He kept doing this until it became too crowded, at which point he took to the rooftops, speeding up as his adrenaline surged and erupting in a whoop of delight at the prospect of the upcoming battles. He was unaware of the 9 strangers who were following him as he ran, as they were also heading to the stadium. The other finalists were waiting for him when he entered the contestant area of the stadium. Sasuke and the Sound Ninja had not yet arrived, but Gaara, Temari, Kankuro, Shino, Shikamaru, and Neji were already there, looking out over the arena. Although there were several trees along the edge and a small stream that ran through the center, the majority of the arena was an earthy clearing. This stream created a tiny pool of water about 20 feet across, dividing the arena into 2 rough halves. Shino was drinking what appeared to be honey water from a bottle. Occasionally, Neji's temple would throb strangely as he drank some tea while leaning against the railing and observing people moving into the seats. Shikamaru seemed to be dozing off in a chair. Although the 3 Sand Ninja were grouped together, Gaara was still allowed as much room as he desired from the 2 elders. The first person to notice Naruto was Neji. He smirked a little as he considered how simple it would be to defeat him in the first fight, then returned his attention to the onlookers, who were now mostly seated. Next to notice him was Gaara, who glared at him calculatingly as his right hand uncontrollably clenched into a fist. Naruto just bowed slightly and grinned at him. Unable to completely comprehend what had transpired that day a month ago, his siblings cast anxious glances at their brother and Naruto. Naruto approached a small food table that had some snacks and fruits on it. He went to a chair by the railing and picked out an orange. He took a seat, pulled a small kunai from his belt, and began peeling the fruit slowly while allowing the aroma of the orange to fill the room. Squeezing a small portion of the rind, he reached over to Shikamaru and caused the oil to spray into the air beneath his nose. Naruto laughed and offered him a slice, which he accepted, while the slack ninja woke up rubbing his nose and muttering mild curses at the unruly blonde. Soon after, a Junin came into the waiting room and yelled for everyone to gather on the arena floor so that the test could begin. To watch the last battles, they descended into the middle of the arena and formed a line facing the cage's seats, where the Hokage and Kei's cage were seated with their bodyguards. Hey, Shikamaru said, gesturing to the Junin serving as this round's judge. Since he wasn't particularly looking forward to the battle, he said, we can't start until all participants have arrived, right? In an attempt to find a way to delay it. The Junin grinned around the senbon in his mouth and said, if they're late, they automatically forfeit their match. Nice try, kid. He held up a piece of paper with the new tournament battles on it, saying, also, the battles have changed a little. There was an unfortunate accident and the sound ninja will not be coming. The last battle was the only one that had changed. It was still Shikamaru versus Temari, Kankuro versus Shino, Gaara versus Sasuke, and Naruto versus Neji. Naruto muttered, you snooze you lose, as the Hokage stood up and gave a brief welcome address to the competitors. In an attempt to keep from becoming overly nervous about the fight, Naruto gently bounced from foot to foot while mentally checking himself. Naruto objected on principle to Neji's tirade about fate during his fight with Hinata. He was unable to accept that having a shabby upbringing was his fate. He had overcome it with determination alone, and he was determined not to let anyone forget it or downplay his accomplishments. The Junin told them, okay, the first two stay, the rest can go up to the observation level. Naruto wandered around a bit and began limbering up by stretching without realizing it. He hummed to himself as he pushed his hood back and enjoyed the sun on his face. You've already accepted your defeat? Neji asked, standing across from him in a casual fighting stance, prepared for the battle to start at the Junin's signal. Naruto said, I just got a feeling, as he assumed his own fighting stance and smiled as his eyes and hair gradually turned red. Neji exuded confidence, and he had good reason to be unconcerned about facing a ninja who was a year younger than him. However, his knowledge was out of date. There is no fate, not here, not now. This is a battle between us. Let's see who the better ninja really is. The Junin threw down his hand and said, begin. The first match started. After Naruto began the hand seals, fire erupted from his hands. It's been a long time since I used this technique. High note Inju, he said. Without burning him, the fire ribbons formed and wrapped around his hands, hiding their length. The ribbons began to fly through the air at Neji with a flick of his wrist, snaking through the air and darting at him from Naruto's position. Despite his increased practice, Naruto was still far from a master of the whips. Neji simply grinned and ducked under them with ease, attempting to approach Naruto so he could use his gentle fist skills to drain Naruto's chakra. Simultaneously, Naruto continued to retreat, attempting to keep the Byakugan user at bay, as he didn't want to repeat the experience of having his chakra source blocked. But Neji was accelerating, and his whips were no longer sufficient. After stopping the whips, Naruto landed in a water-style stance by backflipping onto the stream. When his demon eyes detected Neji's growing confidence, he realized he had erred. Neji started fighting Naruto hand after landing on the water directly in front of him. Neji would undoubtedly be able to water walk, however, such training would be necessary for him to have high-level chakra control over his techniques. When Naruto saw the chakra that had developed around Neji's hands as a result of his demon eye's second-level activation passing through his bracers, he cursed and felt his arms begin to numb. Naruto instantly sank under the water after stopping the chakra to his legs. As Naruto created a seal, several shadow clones joined him beneath the water. Only 7 of the 10 he had attempted to make showed up. He mentally swore. The effects of Neji's attacks were already underway. Neji retreated when 2 of the clones attempted to seize his legs, his Byakugan alerting him to the attempt before they had even reached him. Emerging from the water, Naruto and his clones landed on the riverbank. Neji examined the clones. They were so similar to the original that not even his eyes could tell them apart. The girl in the black kimono grumbled, "This is so boring," as she watched Naruto's clones attack and be vanquished by Neji's swift blows. He should be wiping the floor with that long-haired kid. She shifted around in her kimono, attempting but failing to make it more comfortable. Our brother is very capable, and we must trust that he knows what he is doing, Gobi said, using a white fan she had bought at the market to lightly tap the girl's shoulder. She looked at Hachibi, who was watching the fight idly, and said, "Once he has the approval of the last two, he will be your superior." She could see that his eyes were slightly shimmering even though they were half closed. Nibi's shoulder was lightly tapped by Gobi's servant. The man gave her a nice look, and she made some hand signals that startled some of the local ninja until they realized she was using sign language because she was touching her arms, chest, and face rather than using seals. Gobi turned and gestured toward the other competitors who were watching the match at an angle across the arena. "He's over there," he said. Others in the group turned to gaze at the person he pointed to, the one with the large sand gourd on his back. Gaara was paying close attention to the game because he was intrigued by the Uzumaki boy and thought that he had some power that seemed sinister. The girl in black muttered, "He doesn't seem like much," and quickly covered her mouth with her hand after realizing what she had said. Nanabi glared at her sharply. "Be careful what you say, Kurahayu," she said in a stern and icy tone. For a brief moment, an overhead light went out, putting them in the dark. Kurahayu looked down, embarrassed and a little scared. "He is our brother and to be respected," Nanabi said more amiably. "Now, let us watch the match," and as the light returned, the others relaxed. "We'll meet with our first brother later." The girl in white, who had previously used sign language, covered her mouth to conceal her smile as a musical giggle came from the row behind Kurahayu. Kurahayu sat up and watched the battle, forgetting the reprimand right away. "Oh, shut up, Hato," he said. "Looks like he's in trouble." It was hammering Naruto. After destroying all of Naruto's clones, Neji declared the real Naruto to be within his domain and began one of the most destructive attacks Naruto had ever witnessed, let alone experienced. Point by point, he felt his chakra being sealed off throughout his body. His body was in excruciating pain from the force of the blows, but he was numb from the lack of chakra. When the final blow struck, Naruto was thrown like a ragdoll to the arena floor. In Naruto's mind, Kyuubi said, "I'm still here, kid. Remember, they can't shut me out anymore," initially with a sense of pride but later with concern. "But I can't give you any chakra. If I try and blast through the chakra closure I could damage the buffer the others put on my chakra, and you'd be racked with pain." I know, Naruto whispered to himself as he struggled to stand again, fighting the pain and attempting to avoid fainting. Neji grinned and turned to head for the exit stairs of the arena when he heard the unexpected. "Judge, call it. He is in no condition to continue the match," he said. Naruto burst out laughing. When he turned, he saw that Naruto had succeeded in flipping over and was on all fours, laughing despite the pain he was experiencing. He laughed as he pushed himself back onto his knees, sat up, and turned to face Neji. "Oh, that's good," he said. "You, telling me I can't fight. You're the one that isn't fighting." "You shouldn't be able to move," Neji said, staring appreciatively at the boy. Naruto should have been paralyzed for at least a day because he was certain that he had hit every hit correctly. Naruto made himself kneel before heaving himself to his feet. "Yay, well, that's me. Always fighting, always rebelling against what I'm told," he said. He stretched slightly in an attempt to buy time while he considered a strategy for retaliating without chakra. "Don't learn. Don't fight back. Don't live. One of my earliest memories is a guy in the market kicking me down and telling me to just die. The world would be better," he said grimly. "Hell of a way to grow up, but no, I wasn't going to die." Neji observed him. Naruto was described as tough and having extraordinary endurance in passing, but his ability to endure the pain he had to endure was greater than anything he had witnessed in their age group. His Byakugan came on. No, Naruto still had a blocked chakra. He could see a glimmer of energy coming from Naruto's abdomen, which held a lot of his chakra, but it was unable to escape. However, what was that? On Naruto's chest was another gleam, a bright patch of concentrated chakra. But what was it that wasn't inside him? He smiled and reached into the neck of his hoodie to retrieve a pendant that he had forgotten about until all of his chakra was sealed off and he felt the humming against his chest. "But I've got sources," Naruto said. The tiny pendant was encircled by 9 red opal tails that wrapped around a brass body. There was an unreal light within the opals. Raise the pendant to his lips and whisper the activation word. "I know secrets. I know where one of Leaf's greatest secrets is buried," he said. Kyuubi, Kai. He had received the pendant from Kibo and Kido prior to meeting Kakashi. The person who used jutsu to absorb his extra chakra had broken. When the chakra was finally freed from inside, It erupted in lengthy energy trails that circled Naruto before diving deep into his body and emerging as a red glow. In an instant, his body recovered from all the harm that had been done, including the sealing of his chakra points. Feeling his demonic form attempt to emerge, Naruto let out a feral growl but controlled it. He felt his face attempt to lengthen, his body shift slightly in other directions, and his hair lengthen and begin to grow across his shoulders and down his neck, but it stopped there. To conceal his changes from the judge, he pulled his hood up over his head again, but he was aware that the release clearly displayed the Kyuubi's energy's chakra signature. Now it made no difference. His victory was all that mattered. Neji barely avoided the blow as he charged forward with a speed he had seldom attained before. He also had no intention of surrendering easily. With a dagger in each hand and his body still encased in red energy, Naruto continued to slash and claw without stopping. Regular onlookers couldn't see the effect because of his clothing, but all ninjas saw it and watched, some curious, some hopeful. When Neji abruptly released chakra all over his body and spun, Naruto grabbed hold of his sleeve and twisted it in an attempt to knock him to the ground. Neji's move had the same unexpected effect on everyone present as Naruto's chakra release had. Kaden is one of the Hyuga family's signature moves. After rolling in midair and landing on his hands and knees, Naruto roared forward once more while giggling. "Yes. Fight me with everything you have, so I can beat the fate out of you." He chuckled and engaged in combat, both of them fighting fiercely but visibly. Neji, who was being pushed to the limit by the transformation that had overtaken him, used every trick and skill he possessed in his moves, while Naruto reveled in the rush of his newfound strength. The elements themselves seemed to work against him, and it wasn't just the power or the technique that made him unable to believe it. Suddenly, the style changed, and dust would blow into his eyes as Naruto's bladed bracers sliced through his clothing and left red lines of pain across his arms and chest. The earth gave way beneath his feet, preventing him from getting any footing, while Naruto had solid ground beneath him to stabilize his strong kicks and punches. His arm got caught before he could execute Kaden again, and Naruto threw him into the air without hesitation. Neji saw Naruto doing hand seals as he twisted in midair. Kaden. Ryuzahain Hidofuki no Jutsu. Apparently fire. Shaped chakra wings appeared on Naruto's back. When they beat, they created a wind as hot and dry as anything Neji had ever experienced, and they had a 20-foot span. As the wings beat repeatedly before swinging together to create a fantastic gust that blew the Hyuga through the air and slammed him against the arena wall, he saw Naruto smile. Knowing that he had a few fractures from the impact alone, he fell to the ground and lay there in excruciating pain. Naruto standing over him with the chakra gone was the last thing he saw before going black. "Tell your fate to fuck off." Sakura mumbled, "Oh my god," as she peered down at the arena. He won, he beat Neji. "Yay," Shoji said, licking his chips. The chips gradually vanished as those in the vicinity discussed the battle and the advantages of both Naruto and Neji. "He's gotten a lot more powerful than I remember him." Ino stood up and leaned against the railing, gazing down at Naruto as he left the still, prone Neji. "Wow, I didn't know he had it in him," Ino said. "I knew he had a lot of energy in him, but whoa." Ino looked down at Naruto and blushed slightly. As he made his way to the stairs leading back to the waiting area, his hair turned back to blonde. She turned to Sakura, seeking an explanation. "He looks better with the red hair, but since when has he been able to change it like that? Is it some bloodline or something?" she asked. She muttered, I don't know," as she searched for the answer. She sighed and put her hand to her throbbing head, saying, "He's been so secretive. I haven't heard from him or Sasuke at all since the end of the preliminaries. Something really big happened in the Forest of Death." Ino took a seat beside her friend and asked, "Another headache? You've been getting them a lot since our fight," she said, putting her arm around the girl with the pink hair. "Did you think about going to a doctor?" She took an aspirin out of her pocket and put it in her mouth, making a small grimace as she swallowed it. "I went, and they said there wasn't any reason they could find," she said. She sighed, and the others ignored her as they considered Naruto's battle. "That's what I get for going to a civilian hospital. I should have just gone to the ninja hospital. My mom is so paranoid." The blonde woman's hands trembled as she gazed up at the casino's TV screen. "Oh my god," she said. She glanced down at the piece of paper she was holding. She was considering accompanying her, but her assistant had already passed out. She had placed a $10,000 wager on Uzumaki Naruto against Hyuga Neji at a score of 75-1. This indicated that the piece of paper she was holding was worth $750,000, $750,000. She kept thinking about the number. Then it came to a halt. She said in a whisper, "I won," and then let out a louder cry. She kicked her assistant until she woke up, saying, I won. I won. Hold on, I won. Oh shit. Their pig is making small, anxious noises. Shizune. Get out stuff from the inn. I'm getting the winnings. Her assistant looked up at her and asked, Tsunade. Sama? She got to her feet, holding the anxious pig tightly. Something is wrong. Very, very wrong. We're going home to the leaf. Kurohayu cried out, oh my god. As she witnessed and experienced Naruto's demonic chakra explosion and the subsequent violence against Neji. She bit her lip and writhed in her seat as she watched Naruto leave the field, saying, seeing that just made me all kinds of happy. Hato gave the girl in black a disapproving scowl, but she also blushed when she noticed Naruto turn to wave to the crowd one final time before making his way to the waiting area. Nanabi glanced at her servant before turning to face Gobi. You wish to meet him then? She asked. The demon of night twitched a sly smile at the corner of his mouth, but neither of the girls saw it. Kurohayu said, yes, right away, and Hato took a moment to raise a hand and nod in agreement. Nibi laughed and got Sanbi to laugh as well. Keep your kimono on, she said. He looked at the pamphlet they had been given and said, odd, we'll make sure you meet him once this is done. We won't interfere. Besides, it looks like the next battle is starting. I could have sworn it was a different match next. Rokubi laughed and gestured to the fighters on the other side. You missed it, brother, he said. They postponed the second fight because the Uchiha kid isn't here. Then one with the face paint gave up before even reaching the arena. The other guy must be good to scare him that much. No, Hachibi muttered as he sat up straight and surveyed his surroundings. The other demons stopped and opened their senses when he said, there is something else. Can't you taste it in the air? Shibi offered, anticipation, pausing to sniff once more, of battle. Rokubi said, discontent, as she closed her eyes and heard the wind, tired of waiting. Desire, grumbled Sanbi, shifting and inhaling deeply, for blood. Nibi removed her sandal and pressed her bare foot to the ground. He closed his eyes and experienced sensations that are difficult for a human to comprehend. There's a massive number of shinobi in the forests around the village. Can't tell where they're from, but I'm reading several large concentrations of chakra. He removed his sandals. Joint summoning, probably something big by the feel of it, or several something. Nanabi observed the fight on the arena floor and asked, does the village know, do you think? The fangirl was using her own element to attack the boy. She believed those abilities had long since vanished. She saw the girl with the shadows being herded by the boy. She would have been done long ago if he really knew how to use them. Nibi also watched the match and said, hard to tell, I don't know what the defenses of this village are normally like. But the wall seems well defended. His eyes strayed to the older woman. I didn't know you taught any of those skills to humans, he said. She dismissed it with a wave of her hand. Oh, it was centuries ago, she said. A man who showed promise with my dark skill. It had diminished by appearances. If the boy wins, I may show him the true way. Kurohayu was thinking about something. She left the question open, ended, but it was clear what she was trying to say. If it does come to a big fight. After saying, yes, then you may fight, and I shall leave it up to you as to how and with what, the girl retreated a moment later and apologized, but Nanabi waved her away. She turned to face the others and said, but keep in mind that this is our brother's village. As for the rest of you, should it come to actual battle, what do you suggest? It isn't our fight, Hachibi said, sitting up straight and closing his eyes. He looked like a monk of some stature. Shibi sulked. I disagree, she said to her brother. This is our brother's home, and he isn't able to defend it to his full extent. If one of us was under attack in our sanctuaries, then I have no doubt he would come and help. And you're just being lazy. To the surprise of the others, Gobi glared at them in a way that only an ice queen could. I owe him from long past, she said. None of your business. The words, there are many happy trees here, rumbled Sanbi. I will defend them. The words, I'm with our ninth, made Rokubi laugh. Chattering away, a small white bird landed on a railing after fluttering down. The ones in the forest have symbols like an hourglass and a musical note. That's sand and sound. Send your bird to him. Let Naruto know we will fight on the side of our brother, Nanbi said with a smile. You forget our first brother is a member of Sand, Hachibi said, scowling at his shadowy opponent. He was retorted by Nanabi, however our first brother's replacement doesn't have our approval yet, to which the others nodded. Send your bird. A short while later, the bird took off. Then, we must limit our authority, Hachibi sighed. These trinkets are useful for hiding our power, but we need to do our own part. We can't give ourselves away here. But let's have some fun, Rokubi chuckled. The others considered it and nodded. A little challenge then. Restrict to one tail of power, and then only use one weapon or item. Nanabe grinned at them and scowled at the arena below. It's settled then, she said. She sighed. He gave up. How disappointing. This younger generation needs some serious motivation, she said, holding her cane across her lap and standing up with it. She said, I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to have a word with that boy. She then proceeded to a flight of stairs, descended, and disappeared. Shikimaru was making his way to the contestant area by climbing the stairs. Sasuke had arrived shortly after his match was over, but he wasn't in a rush. If he was lucky, the match would continue for a long time. He believed he had at least earned a nap, so he was considering having a snack before dozing off. However, he halted when he noticed that the hallway in front of him had darkened. Behind him, he noticed the same thing. A lone light above him was the only thing preventing his own small section of hall from being completely dark beyond. He mumbled, shit, this is going to be troublesome. Only if you let it be, child, he said, as an elderly woman wearing a black kimono emerged from the shadows in front of him. She was supported by a black cane, though he wasn't sure she needed one. He sighed and slipped his hands into his pockets. What do you want? I have no chakra left, so I can't fight you, he said. I don't want to fight you, she said, taking a scroll out of her sleeve. She flung it at him. Shikamaru grabbed the scroll and opened it slightly, reading the first foot or so of parchment before further unrolling it until more than 6 feet had spilled out. You have talent, boy. Talent that shouldn't go to waste using those weak techniques. He stopped and took another look at them. These are the secret techniques of my clan, he said. He looked up, but she was gone. Well, some of them. I haven't heard of half of these. How did you get this scroll? He asked. She was no longer there, and the lights were back to normal. He complained again. I knew this was going to be troublesome, and put the scroll away as Nanabe, across the arena, smiled slightly and went back to her seat. Only when a bird landed on Naruto's shoulder and began chatting into his ear did the others look up. The altercation between Gaara and Sasuke. The bird said, hold on, not so fast, but it still chattered. The others could hear the bird's quick speech now that it had slowed down. Enemies are massing outside Leaf, Naruto said with a smile and a nod, and the others turned away from the battle for a moment to stare at him curiously. The bird took off and disappeared from view. Naruto yelled at the bird, tell them not to go overboard, but it had already left. He noticed that everyone was staring at him. What? Gaara wasn't enjoying herself. Gaara's distorted childhood experiences ensured that he did not have a typical definition of fun. However, he was usually happy after a good, bloody fight. He was unhappy, though, because the boy refused to bleed and continued to smile. He was also troubled by the strangely quiet voice in his head that was constantly muttering for blood, death, and retribution. Never before had it been so quiet. Never. He had thoughts of the metallic taste of fresh blood before he had the words or images to express them. He was in ecstasy as he saw flesh being torn from all around him. The whispers began when he learned words, and they have continued ever since. Until a month ago, no, not until the boy with the blonde hair had yelled. He believed that only he had the unique chakra that he had summoned. Then, for a brief instant, the whispers had ceased. Gaara was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost missed the Uchiha's acceleration. Similar to the previous green boy. Why were these Leaf Ninja there? He clenched his jaw and walked. Wherever he directed it, the sand ceased to be passive and shot up from the ground, streaming through the air. Striking out at the boy with the black hair who ducked and twisted as the sand moved in a way that no human opponent could. 2 torrents turned into 4 streams, then 8, then 16, as the sand continued to split repeatedly. The Uchiha were whipped by sand tendrils. He was finally whipped across the leg, arm, and cheek. The blood was absorbed by the stuck tendrils, briefly turning them red before it was absorbed by the entire sand. I need more blood. Please give it to me. He winced as a thought that wasn't his own suddenly came to him. To keep the monster at bay and the whispers at bay, Gaara gritted his teeth. He barely made it. Blood was the key to the monster's desperate desire to escape. Unfortunately, Sasuke only needed the wince. It was a strong uppercut that could have broken a normal person's neck. However, Gaara was clearly anything but normal. He was knocked off his feet and flew back, but the only time it ever happened, his sand caught him and gently set him down. Where his armor had been broken, it flaked off. However, he was promptly replaced, and the remainder of his body was strengthened. Although it made him heavier, it might save his life. Enough. Give me a break. This village will be reduced to dust if I destroy this pest. Gaara screamed uncontrollably and gripped his head. He had never experienced such a powerful voice of the monster. And he smiled at it. This might actually be enjoyable. Kurohayu exclaimed, "Oh," as she sensed the Ichibi, the first brother's demonic chakra encircling the sand boy and encasing him in a ball of sand that prevented the Uchiha from attacking. It wasn't as thrilling as the ninth brother's battle. Her senses told her it was wrong. When Shibi felt the corrupted demonic chakra, her big eyes were on the verge of tears. What did they do to him? Nanabi said, "His nature has been corrupted," in a quiet voice. Her eyes sank into the shadows as she looked more closely. The seal on the boy is trying to change Ichibi's nature. Hachibi clenched a fist and said, "He must be in terrible pain." "Which one?" Kurohayu asked, echoing Hato's query. "Both of them." With a sharp wind blowing through the stadium, Rokubi said, "That's enough," and got up from her seat, cracking her knuckles. "No," Gobi said, placing a hand of restraint on her sister's shoulder. Rokubi began to protest, but she stopped when she saw her sister's icy rage. This is a human problem. Let them know what happens when they try and change a demon. One by one, she met her siblings' eyes, and they all nodded in agreement. As the fight went on, she sat down and fidgeted. Leaning against the railing and gazing down at the arena, Naruto's eyes were visible and his hair was a vivid red. He watched the battle without making any noise, but everyone who saw him could tell he was nervous. He would face one of the two powerhouses in the next round, so some assumed that was the reason. They were mistaken. In his mind, Kyuubi was yelling in anger and fury at the sensation of his siblings' twisted chakra. However, Naruto froze. The chakra scared him because it was chilling. More than the yelling of Kyuubi or the power he displayed over the sands. He had never been so afraid of power since his first encounter with Zabuza. His demonic eyes saw more in his sibling than just killer intent. The twisted intent of destruction was the cause. His focus was on destroying everything, not just killing. It was visible on him. And he witnessed the madness. His eyes could detect the opalescent aura. As he drew on the demonic chakra, it appeared to get worse than the last time he saw it. "What am I going to do to him? He's too much." He could still attack, but none of my blows could ever penetrate that barrier. He would ruin me. To put it mildly, Naruto was terrified. His grip turned his knuckles white, but he didn't even notice the metal bars of the railing twisting beneath his fingers. "You aren't fighting him alone," a deep, demonic voice growled from inside him. The voice reverberated in his mind, reminding him of his own strength. Kyuubi's voice was more bile-filled than Naruto had ever heard before. "This thing is not our brother. It is a parody of his nature, twisted by humans who think they knew how to control a great demon. We will beat this thing, and reclaim our true brother to our side." Unaware that he had just spoken, the boy muttered, "We could have been like that," and received a number of stern looks, especially from Sans 2 Genin. Kyuubi's confident remark created an image that made Naruto smile bitterly, and the destruction would have rent this village from the face of the earth, Naruto said. Seeing the twisted bars in his hands, he finally let them go. He reminded himself again that he had a great deal of power of his own. The remaining Sand siblings were even more alarmed by Gaara's retreat inside a ball of his sand on the field than they were by Naruto's display of strength. As he struggled to come up with a strategy to counter such a full-scale defense, Sasuke had retreated, adhering to the arena wall halfway up. After the hand seals were completed, inspiration struck, and the sound of a swarm of birds chatting away brought the chakra to life. As a mere genin, Kakashi had unleashed his signature move, Chidori. Sasuke charged across the field and then down the wall at the motionless ball of sand, while Naruto looked on indifferently. Gaara, however, didn't appear to be merely waiting. Sand spikes appeared out of the ground at strange angles with each step Sasuke took, attempting to block his path, injure him, or do anything else to prevent the attack from striking the shield and endangering Gaara inside. Sasuke, however, was unstoppable. With his Sharingan in full force, the spikes presented little danger as he sidestepped, ducked under, and over them as they flew from the ground. To everyone's surprise, Sasuke drove his upgraded fist through the sand. As everyone held their breath to see if the attack had been sufficient and if the genius had vanquished the untouchable, silence fell upon the arena. The most unexpected of sounds broke the silence. Laughter. It began as a low snigger and developed into a loud cackle. Sasuke punched a hole in the barrier, and the sand of the orb began to move around it. Refusing to let go, it twisted around his arm as he attempted to yank it back. In the hopes of gaining some leverage, he braced a leg against the barrier, but the sand simply folded around his foot as well, trapping him even more firmly. Gaara said, "Nearly got me," from within the sand dome. The voice snarled, but not enough power, as Sasuke's arm felt like it was being compressed. Gritting his teeth, Sasuke powered up the Chidori once more, but it hurt him too because he didn't have control. However, it was sufficient to break up the sand surrounding his arm, enabling him to pull himself free. He took a deep breath and began hand seals right away. Gaara barely had time to close his shield before the fireball struck, combining the sand's outer layers into shattered, brown glass. The combination of techniques he had to employ just to get away from the sand nin caused Sasuke to exert himself, kicking his foot free and back-flipping out of range while panting. Gaara's new form emerged as his sand moved and withdrew. He is becoming more like a gourd due to the sand. Instead, he has a long tail, claws, and armor fur for protection. His body was covered in sand, with dark patterns moving through it. He hardly had time to say, "My turn," before his right arm sprang out and tried to impale Sasuke on a sand spike. Reflexes and his activated Sharingan were the only things that kept him from dying. "Interesting," Gobi said, glancing down at the conflict. "It seems the host is unable to transform into a more suitable form for using our chakra. So has let it take its own shape through his sand. Quite innovative. I can't say that I thought he would have the control for such a technique. These hosts are quite interesting people." "Yay, it's pretty cool," Kurihyu said, watching in awe as the Ichibi's host put the Sharingan user on the defensive all the time, forcing him to jump into the air as he had to dodge the sand's ever-changing attacks, which ranged from tendrils to torrents and lashes. Gaara crossed his arms and developed sharp growths along them as soon as he was airborne. The air was filled with a sharp shuriken of condensed sand. Unable to avoid them, Sasuke attempted, with varying degrees of success, to deflect the projectiles with his own shuriken. Out of the 8 sand shuriken, 3 were hit and fell apart, while 2 others missed. Sasuke was able to prevent them from striking anything important, but they still cut through his shirt and pants with ease. Sasuke had to find a way to make himself concentrate more. The sand shinobi's strong sand defense must have been breached somehow. He ducked under trees and searched his pack for something that might be helpful. Wire, a vial of poison, a couple of exploding seals. There was nothing that could possibly penetrate the sand armor. 2 tendrils attempted to attack him from the front as the sand snaked between the trees before he could try to come up with a plan. Unaware of the other tendril that approached from behind, he leapt into the air, avoiding them both. He was dragged out of the tree's cover and slung across the field before he could cut himself free because it had wrapped around his legs. In front of the demonic sand form, Gaara laughed as his long tail dragged Sasuke around, slamming him against a wall before lifting him back into the air and leaving him hanging by his feet. In order to prevent seals from being made, Gaara took hold of his arms and held them out. With his arms extended in the vice-like grip and his legs restrained by the sand tail, Sasuke struggled upside down. Searching frantically for a way out, he looked around. However, there was none. Before he could gather enough chakra to even attempt calling on Chidori again, the sand painfully twisted his arm, breaking his concentration. He missed the chakra spike that was coming from somewhere outside the arena because of his pain. Gaara, however, did not overlook it. With his mouth wide and teeth bare, Gaara's demonic form hesitated, ready to devour the morsel before him and murder him for the sheer joy of it. He pivoted and gazed in the direction of the contestant area. He was being watched with bright red eyes by Naruto, the boy who had previously prevented him from killing the fast green boy. With the sand head extending inhumanely, he advanced to bite Sasuke once more, preparing to rip him open and put an end to the battle. However, he was stopped once more. There are more chakra spikes than previously. He noticed them when he looked around. A group with bright eyes watching him. With a growl, he twisted Sasuke's arms, causing both shoulders to dislocate and sending him crashing to the ground. As the bloodied and broken Uchiha lay at the sand demon's feet, the arena fell silent. He had held back when chakra spiked, but everyone was certain he was going to die. It was felt by all. Since it wouldn't be good for either village's reputation, many believed it was one of the cage, using what little power they had to stop death in the arena. The referee's voice could be heard clearly, and everyone in the arena released breaths they were unaware they had been holding. Winner, Gaara of the Sand. As Gaara took a step back, the sand shifted away from him and then back again into the shape of the gourd on his back. However, the medics gave him plenty of space as they hurried out to pick up Sasuke because everyone knew what he could do now. Before moving him, he reinserted his arms into their sockets. The Junin referee asked Gaara, "Are you ready for the next battle?" The glance Gaara gave him was more than enough to let him know that it wouldn't be required. "I'm permitted to give you time to rest after the battle because of the rearrangement," he gestured as he glanced up at the contestant area. "Naruto Uzumaki, please come to the arena for the first match of the second round." Naruto barely finished speaking before he leapt over the railing and slid down the arena's wall until he reached the sandy floor. As he approached the two surviving ninja, Sasuke had been taken away by the medics to be examined. He inhaled deeply. With her arms folded, Gaara watched and waited. Despite the silence of the voice in his head, he felt a range of emotions, including excitement, bloodlust, anger, and a number of new ones. The boy approaching him worried him in ways he had never experienced before, even though his face revealed nothing. The referee whispered, "You still have time to withdraw," as he glanced at Naruto and cast a sidelong glance at Gaara. However, Naruto shook his head and turned to face the Junin, who retreated under the influence of his crimson eyes. Speaking quietly, Naruto said, "Leave the arena." The Junin found himself nodding in agreement and taking a step back when someone said, "You don't want to be here." He took a few more steps away, then turned and held up a hand. Neither moved when he asked, "Contestants ready?" And then his hand dropped. "Begin." Then, not wanting to be close to either of these two when the fight started, the Junin turned and fled. But neither of them made a move. Just looking at each other. The Junin continued to run until he was almost against the wall, at which point he turned to face the two and asked, "What are we keeping them for?" After almost a minute had passed since the beginning, Gaara asked, "Why make him leave?" Naruto said, "Because I wanted to talk with you privately." As he glanced up at the spectators, he inhaled deeply before saying, "Well, as privately as we can expect in this situation. I am the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, the great nine-tailed fox. And I know that you are the container of the Ichibi, and that the seal is hurting you both." It would be an understatement to say that Gaara was surprised by the boy standing in front of him. He believed that his status was one of his country's most closely guarded secrets. In addition, this boy was disclosing his own secret without any kind of provocation. But among the things the boy had said, that was not what he was thinking about. Hurting? I feel no pain. Nothing can hurt me. As far as he could recall, it was accurate. Nothing could hurt him, even though he had heard about pain. Not even when he was engaged in combat with Lee, who was the first to breach his defenses. Though they didn't hurt, he had felt the effects of every blow. The gourd on his back began to move forward, encasing him in thicker armor with additions, as if to highlight his statement. A tail appeared and waved behind him as he stooped forward slightly, with sand claws growing along his fingers and spines along his back. Though not to the same degree as before, Naruto was undoubtedly more dangerous and protected than he had been just moments before. Naruto distanced himself as Gaara began to growl. "I didn't mean just physically," he said. He opened his mouth to say, "The incompatible chakras are making your mind," but was cut off when a sand wield swung out from Gaara and sand darts sped toward Naruto. Gaara yelled at Naruto, "Are you calling me Insane?" as the sand encircled his body, further transforming him into the same creature that had vanquished Sasuke just moments earlier. "I wouldn't say insane, yikes." He just managed to move aside as a huge arm of sand fell where he was standing. With a gulp, he flipped out of range and positioned himself defensively, holding a kunai in each hand. "I really don't want to fight you." The voice changed as the shape in front of him began to enlarge. "Too bad, I really want to eat you," he said. It wasn't until he saw thin ribbons of sand flying through the air and rising up from the arena floor that Naruto realized it was part of Gaara's mass of sand. It continued until a two-story tall creature with wavy markings on its body was formed by the sand and was staring down at the boy on the arena floor. If the feathers hadn't begun to fall and the spectators hadn't been forced to sleep, Naruto's cry of, "Oh shit!" would have echoed the thoughts of everyone in the arena. And as four ninja and enormous snake summons slammed through the wall, Naruto might have heard the explosions coming from the gates if he hadn't been in a panic. The invasion was underway. As they all began to get up, Kurahayu looked up at Nanabe and said, "I can have fun now, right?" "Yes," the elderly woman replied, raising her black staff and holding it close to its center with both hands. When she gave a slight twist, there was a faint click, and as she pulled, the two halves of her dual sword staff came loose, revealing thin blades that glinted in the light. "It is time." A fist of sand almost as big as Naruto's smashed into the ground, causing it to briefly lose its cohesiveness and spread out before coming back together and launching another attack into the air. He was attempting to change, but it didn't seem like he would have the opportunity because he needed to remain motionless in order to focus. "We will crush you," the creatures of the sand cried out in that peculiar two-toned voice. As he ducked and weaved through the attacks, using a seal and creating shadow clones, Naruto repeatedly exclaimed, "Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit!" However, they were swiftly destroyed and only served as slight diversion. He was distracted by the sudden shout in his mind. He said, "We," and almost got impaled on a tree that was thrown at him. In his mind, Kyuubi yelled, "Ichibi has surfaced enough. Do it now," to remind himself of the counsel the demon had given him prior to the fight. Leaping back, Naruto ran up the wall until he was almost at Gaara, Ichibi's eye level. "In the name of the ninth beast, I challenge Ichibi to fight for the approval of air," he yelled at the top of his lungs, and it came out quickly. His shout was not heard by many ninja, but those who did would never forget. 2 shinobi from Sound and Leaf were among them, and they would promptly report it to their respective leaders. With a confused expression on its face as the 2 minds processed what had been yelled, the sand beast's claws came to a halt just before swatting Naruto off the wall. Naruto stood on the wall, waiting to see what would happen, pausing to catch his breath. Naruto interpreted the enormous sand form's apparent internal writhing and further facial contortions as positive signs because the arm did not descend. From above Naruto, a voice said, "Their minds are in turmoil." A monk in white robes was standing on the ledge above him when he looked up, and he saw the monk sipping from a sake jug. With wry humor, he said, "The host doesn't know our ways and our brother was never such a fan of them." The staff emerged from the wall as he raised a hand from the ledge, but he made no seals. "However, the challenge has been issued and he must answer. And since you challenged Ichibi himself and not his host, there is an easy way to settle this." There was a big crystal hanging in the middle of the chime ring, seemingly unsupported by anything, and a white wax wood chime staff emerged. Naruto glanced up at the monk and asked, "Hachibi?" He began to ask, "Where are the others? What are you do?" But the staff began to spin before he could finish. When Gaara, Ichibi saw the monk's staff, she flinched, but it was too late. The crystal caught the sun's light as the monk swung the staff once, and a ray emerged from it, striking the sand beast in the center of the forehead and connecting them as the rings chimed off one another. Nothing appeared to move for a moment. However, it was short-lived, as the staff was lowered and the beam dimmed. He looked thoughtfully at the sand demon, which was expanding again until it filled the entire arena, and said, "The host will sleep now and Ichibi shall be fully aware. Your challenge cannot be denied." To clear the path, Naruto ran up the wall and stood beside Hachibi. After a quick glance, he failed to spot any of the other great beasts. In any event, the boy was grateful for the beast of the sun's intervention, but he was also brief in his appreciation of Ichibi's developing form. The sand form stopped growing, but that didn't help much because its teeth were now almost as big as Naruto's. "Huh, so you're the whelp who my sands whisper about," the sand form said. He growled as he looked at the Hachibi. "Coming out only now? Lazy bastard." Hachibi gestured to Naruto with his staff, which jingled softly in response to the movement, saying, "Much has changed, brother, but we will talk of it later. You have been challenged." With a quiet sigh, he turned to face Naruto. His expression begged Naruto to reconsider his choice. As the challenger, you get to pick the time and place. But when Naruto heard the sounds of battle reverberating throughout the village, he realized he was running out of time. He gestured to the outer wall and the forest beyond, saying, "In the empty forest outside the village. And there is no better time than now." Hachibi nodded and lifted his staff into the air, bringing the end down onto the ledge. "So be it," he said. When the rings rang, they didn't so much chime as they boomed. This, along with the staff's flash of light, caused Naruto and the sand demon to vanish, leaving only Hachibi. Behind him, a leaf ninja glared at him while positioned in a fighting stance. The human-shaped 8-tailed beast turned to face the ninja. Ninja demanded, "What did you do with them?" As he gazed at the monk, Sasuke's Sharingan came to life. He was left in a hospital bed, which did not suit him at all, because the medical professionals who had been treating him had been called away for more crucial matters. Sasuke's arms ached, but not as much as they had after his shoulders were returned to their natural positions. As he pushed himself out to see what was happening, a drug that was meant to prevent him from moving only made the pain go away. The monk lifted his sake jug and took a sip, his head cocked back slightly, the jug briefly obstructing his view of Sasuke. "They're in the forest. Do not interfere with their battle. It is a family matter." Sasuke yelled, "You will tell me where they are," and rushed forward. However, the monk was gone when he struck. From behind him, the monk said, "No, I will not." The man vanished in a glimmer of light as Sasuke turned in time to witness it. As we like to say, don't poke sleeping demons. Disoriented by the abrupt teleportation, Naruto emerged in a sizable clearing in the forest with a river running along the far edge. He glanced around at the scene, blinking. Fortunately, he hadn't been teleported up on a branch at the time, or he would have likely fallen. Unfortunately, the sand demon had also materialized 100 meters away, so he wasn't alone. The voice inside his head said, "Transform now," and he blinked. Naruto nodded even though he had already been told, "Once the battle starts I can no longer give you advice." He pressed his palms together and inhaled deeply. Compared to before, the transformation was simpler and quicker. His ears moved up on his head, growing longer, his muzzle expanded, his teeth elongated slightly, and his skin hardly itched as the fur grew along his body. As they discovered a middle ground that he could still utilize, his hands developed claws and their fingers grew softer. But it was the last part that caught him off guard. A jolt of pleasure ran down his spine from the nape of his neck, and he was aware that his tail was growing. However, he noticed two fully developed tails twisting out behind him when he turned to look. All of his senses were acutely sharp, and he felt more energized than ever. Ichibi's imposing figure gazed down at the young human boy and said, "I'm not the only one with tricks. Kyuubi has changed you more than you realize, human. In any case, you chose the time and place, now I choose the method, battle. Of course it will be a contest of strength. I must give you a chance. So I offer you this. Damage my container who is still here in my body and you will win. The stakes are your approval as heir if you win. If you lose you will never get that approval and remain my servant for 100 years. Agreed, snarled Naruto. He was aware that it would be difficult and that he didn't have many options, but he had to find a way. And spoken to each other, they awaited a sign to begin the fight. The monstrously large sand body of Ichibi was still much larger than the transformed Naruto. However, he had a lot more power now and could employ a lot of tricks. All he could hope was that they would suffice. Battles were raging throughout the village. In addition to being almost as familiar with the terrain, the Sand and Sound Shinobi had been briefed on the abilities of many Leaf Ninja clans. The Leaf Ninja held their own, fighting valiantly to protect their village despite the strength of the combined forces. Overall, it was fairly even with the invaders' massive summons. That is, until the strangers stepped in. Titan Fist. The cries from above caused both the skirmishing Leaf and Sound Ninja to leap back. With her back to the Leaf Ninja, a girl leapt from a building's roof and landed in the middle of the road. The cobblestones in front of her were struck hard by her clasped hands. A loud crack caused the road to split, sending huge pieces of stone and debris flying up at the Sound Ninja, hurting him and making him run. A few pieces of rock fell off the girl's hands as she stood up and shook them out. Iruka glanced at the girl and asked, "Where is your insignia? What group are you fighting for?" He knew them all, but she was young, perhaps a genin. She turned to face him, and he shifted into a defensive position. She grinned and said, "I don't have one, at least, not one you would recognize," before a Sand Ninja who had seen her attack on his ally nearly impaled her with a spear thrown from a considerable distance down the street. And if the woman in white hadn't shown up, she would have been. A slender sword swung out from her wrist, striking the spear, which not only missed the black-clad girl but also flew past Iruka and struck a Sand Ninja emerging from the rubble, instantly killing him. Iruka found her to be beautiful, but her tone made him shudder. "Be careful, young one. I believe that the eldest sister has plans for you, and it would not do to have you expire so soon." She spoke calmly as she turned to face him. She clasped a hand over the younger girl's shoulder and vanished, leaving Iruka in a state of confusion. "You may be rest assured that my siblings and I are no threat to the Leaf Village so long as we are not attacked." Rokubi stood atop the spire of one of the region's tallest buildings, overlooking the fighting below. In one hand, she held a bow longer than her own body. It was white as bone, but no one could identify the material. She had wrapped her other hand around an antenna that emerged from the spire and reached into a quiver. One by one, a half-dozen long arrows are drawn out and placed against the bowstring. A number of locations below saw the fighting halt, with arrows passing through the heads of Sound and Sand Shinobi, killing them in their tracks. In one instance, the arrow reached its target by passing through a metal shield. Later, no one who looked for the arrows in an attempt to identify the mysterious group that helped the Leaf Village would find any of them. There was a fierce battle going on in another part of town. The elderly woman and the girl she was walking with went unnoticed until it was too late. As a Sound Ninja dropped beside her, wire in hand, prepared to use the elderly woman as a living shield against the defending ninja, a Leaf Ninja attempted to shout warning. But just as he was drawing the wire, the little white girl who was walking with the elderly woman sliced through it with a kunai from inside her long sleeves, causing it to break. One of the long, thin blades concealed in the old woman's staff pierced the Sound Ninja's heart, killing him before he could prepare his own kunai. After that, they took off, with the new pair appearing to dance while fighting. The white-clad girl skillfully swung her kunai, daggers, and shuriken from her sleeves, wounding numerous people with her sweeping motions. though only a small number of them were fatal. That was handled by the elderly woman. As the weight changed, her adaptable blades appeared to lengthen as she changed her grip or moved through the air. The tip skillfully scuttled tendons or arteries or darted between ribs to attack vital organs. Any strike from a long-range weapon vanished into the girl's sleeves before being flung back a second later. A lightning bolt was sent at the pair by a quick jutsu, but it was unsuccessful. Reaching out with one of her weapons, the elderly woman swept the younger one behind her. Instead of striking the woman holding it, it sped down its length, arched to the other blade, and was launched harmlessly into the air. A moment later, the ninja who had attempted the attack was dead, a dagger in his throat. With only a few leaf nin hurt, the battle was over. After glancing around and cleaning her blades, the elderly woman sheathed them inside one another and transformed it back into what seemed to be a harmless staff. She faced the girl and gave her a direct look. The girl bowed to her and nodded, but no words were exchanged. The elderly black woman turned to the wary ninja observing her. Without giving any more explanation, she turned and fled more quickly than anyone could catch up with her. She is a medic. She will tend to your wounds. The girl came toward them with her hands covered by her sleeves, out of sight, but glowing subtly from a simple medical healing method. One of the ninjas stated, "We can't trust her, Captain," while crouching and clutching a bleeding arm in one hand. The girl had stopped moving and was waiting for their ascent when the scarred captain glanced over her. Their captain yelled, "Shut up and take your medicine." He gave the girl a nod, and she moved forward, placing her hands on the wounded man's arm and using her technique to guide the healing. "Those of you injured get healed to battle ready. Those of you who can fight are moving with me now. We don't have time to be picky," he said. After observing her for a while, he gathered his unhurt soldiers and left. At the front gate, Ibiki was addressing the invasion force's main spear and their enormous summons. A few leaf ninja were able to summon themselves, but none of them were as big as the enormous three-headed snake that had destroyed the front gate. The leaf ninja were struggling to approach the snake closely enough to inflict enough harm on it to either kill it or make it flee. His task was made more challenging by the sound and sand entering through the hole the snake had created. He yelled, "Get those wounded out of here," at some medical personnel who were attempting to treat the injured close to the battlefield. When he yelled, "I want long-range ninja at positions 4, 6, and 8 centered on the snake," his subordinates promptly dispatched to convey his directives. No one in particular heard him yell, "I want someone to get rid of that damn bastard," but he still received a response. A serene voice said, "All right," from a short distance behind him. With his kunai drawn, he spun around. How could anyone have gotten close to him when he was so vigilant? Even though he was staring at the man, he could hardly feel him. He was wearing a brown formal kimono. The man in the green kimono behind him, who was almost twice as tall, gave him a bigger shock by carrying a huge war hammer over his shoulder. If Ibiki had to guess, the man was using a single-handed grip while holding a 4-foot-long hammer with an iron head that must have weighed more than 100 pounds. They were very skilled ninja to pull that off, but he was still unable to sense either of them. The smaller of the two extended his hands and flexed them slowly, cracking his joints from fingers to shoulders. "Pull your ninja back, we'll take care of the snake summon." Weighted rings were visible on Ibiki's fingers. Even though Ibiki was still holding his blade out, he watched them and was fairly certain that he wouldn't be speaking to them if they intended to harm him. "Who are you? Are you our allies?" he asked. The big man shrugged and said, "For now." "Indeed," the smaller one replied. Ibiki started to say, "In any case, this will use up the power we are allowed to use." The little man interrupted him by raising a hand. "We've given you enough hints, I'm sure. It is up to you to figure out the rest." They strode past him and headed for the gates after saying that. A subordinate appeared kneeling beside Ibiki and said, "Long-range ninja are ready." "Orders, sir?" "Sir?" he asked, looking up at the scarred man when he didn't get a response right away. "Damn it. Tell them to hold for 1 minute. If those two can't get rid of the snake, then have them unleash everything they can. If they can, then order them to collapse the wall and seal it," he yelled at the messenger. Without hesitation, the messenger passed along the information, pondering what two Ibiki might have been referring to. Sanbi and Nibi marched into the fray. As he gathered strength for his attack, Sanbi silently dropped his hammer behind him and assumed a low stance. Nibi leapt onto the hammer's head and mustered his own strength. Given the enormous amounts of power they could naturally extract from their surroundings, it was challenging to limit them to a single tail. From behind him, Sanbi swung his hammer high with a powerful roar of effort. Nibi was launched high into the air at its peak. The hammer, however, did not end there. It struck the main road with great force, heading straight for the gate where the snake was. Two of the previously damaged buildings collapsed as the shockwave tore down the street. The road ripped up beneath the snake as the shockwave struck it, sending spikes into its body that slowed it down for Nibby's final blow but weren't enough to kill it. The snake screamed as the road tore up beneath it. Nibby began to fall in the direction of the snake after reaching his own apex. Using his own method, he doubled his mass every second of the descent until he struck the snake. Several tons of force were applied directly to the snake's head, breaking its spine so violently that the other heads were killed when their attachment to the body was severed. Before causing more harm to the village, Nibby let go of the technique. Despite being covered in snake blood, no one stopped him as he made his way back to Sanbi. He gestured to the top of the Hokage monument and said, "Let's clean up first, then we can watch the rest of this from up there." They both vanished after the big man gave a nod of agreement. Rokubi was already there when the two appeared on the Shodime's carved head, and she was knocked down by an arrow. She mumbled, "Last one, hold on a second." As soon as she felt them, she let go after blowing on the feathers that were pulled back by her cheek. The arrow passed through two ninja at ungodly speeds before coming to a halt in the center of a third. When Rokubi looked up, two more people had joined them. Kurohayu had accompanied Nanabi when she first appeared. The black-clad girl didn't appear happy. She was whispering, "I had them right where I wanted them." The girl wearing it didn't look much better, and her kimono was ripped, burned, and cut in several places. Her injuries, however, appeared to be minor. Her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm sure you did," she said. She attempted to smooth the girl's unkempt hair with her outstretched hand. The girl complained but remained silent. "If you want to impress anyone, you've got to show finesse with that strength of yours, not just breaking things. Who are we waiting on?" Rokubi said, "Fourth, fifth, and eighth," before unwinding her bow and sealing them into a tiny scroll with the quiver. Shibi strolled up, slipping the coral handle of her notorious water whip between her impressive cleavage. "I saw our lazy brother send the captured two into the forest. Probably to hash out their little quarrel." Questions would later be raised regarding the drowned bodies in the fountain outside the school, as well as the terrified reports of a few children and a woman wielding a whip that did not fit any known ninja description. Some tried to attack the school. That would not do. Soon after, Gobi and Hado came back. With her kimono as spotless as ever, Gobi declined to discuss her personal involvement. Later investigations would not overlook the frozen and shattered corpses. But the bodies also brought up some intriguing questions, especially since the snow delegation had decided not to attend this year. Hado simply grinned and signed that she had found all of her shuriken and kunai and assisted the injured, which was a remarkable accomplishment for someone who had used so many hundreds. She visited Kurohayu to get her abrasions treated. Hachibi said, "Well, we're all done here," while sipping from his sake jug. He turned to see some ninja leaping up along the Hokage monument toward them and asked, "Shall we go watch our brothers?" As he raised his staff into the air, the others gathered around him and agreed, saying, "I think it would be best if we didn't stick around." There was a flash of light and the gentle sound of chimes as he brought it down. The squad's sensor detected only traces of the 9 figures, 7 adults, 4 women, 3 men, and 2 girls. That fit some suspicious descriptions, but they were unable to interpret them before they vanished entirely. Just as the battle began, they emerged beneath the trees at the edge of the clearing. After she surveyed the grounds, Nanabi gave the monkish brother a long look and said, "An interesting battleground choice," but he chose to ignore her. Kurohayu scrambled up a tree and sat on a high branch to get a better view of the fight. "Oh man, now we get to see him really cut loose. This is going to be awesome," she exclaimed. "He doesn't seem to be doing all that well." Rokubi, who was standing on the branch beside her, scowled as she saw Naruto strike the Ichibi's arm with such force that it failed to crush him once more, instead scattering and then quickly reforming the sand. Hado stood beside Gobi to observe as she stepped up onto a boulder, saying, "Perhaps, but first brother hasn't landed a hit either." The Ichibi was big and could control a lot of sand, it was true, but Naruto wasn't having much trouble avoiding those enormous arms or the sporadic sand waves because of his size. He was barely slowed down by the sand shuriken. Sanbi remarked, "I think he's getting angry," observing Ichibi's mounting annoyance. He roared, and the others couldn't help but agree. A ball of high-density air shot out as wind chakra gathered, almost hitting Naruto, who barely avoided being hit by a boulder before the chakra ball ripped through the top half of it, creating a space that Naruto could have easily fit through. He scowled at the Ichibi and said, "Whoa, hold on. I thought this was a contest of strength. That means no techniques, right?" Ichibi roared, firing off more chakra balls in an attempt to hit the nimble fox. "Foolish boy, my entire body is one of those techniques. "We're chakra-given bodies, our strength is the elements themselves," Ichibi said. "Well, that changes things then," Naruto said with a smile. He then hurried along Ichibi's body where the bullets couldn't reach him, brandishing fire whips from his hands, slashing out and removing large chunks of sand, creating unsightly, warped, and discolored glass. Any sand that wasn't turned into glass, however, simply flowed back onto the body because it was still enormous. Nibi shook his head, feeling the struggle through his connection to the ground rather than merely observing it. "He still doesn't get why here," he said. "He will," Nanabi said with a gentle smile. "If he doesn't, he is clearly unworthy." Ichibi screamed in agony and fury as the whip's heat sliced through him, but it was barely enough to slow him down. Naruto was hit roughly by a long arm that swept across his body, sending him flying across the clearing. In fact, he was obviously confused by the blow and skipped twice across the surface of the river before landing on the far bank. He stood up and staggered twice before collapsing to his knees on the riverbank, his gaze gradually settling on his own fox. Light, rippled reflection. "Oh, hey." He smiled as he glanced up at Ichibi. He stood up and shook himself, shaking off some of the water in his fur from when he skipped across. "Okay. I was going about this the wrong way." He smiled and made a seal. "I'm going to win this now and you aren't going to land another hit." Shibi shook her head, saying, "Took him long enough." Hato and Kurohayu glanced at her, but she simply pointed. "At least we know that Kyuubi isn't helping him. Just watch, this is going to be awesome."
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.